My name is Heidi Andrews. I am 32 years old. 1 month ago, I stood in the center of our historic Charleston courtyard, clutching my 2-month-old daughter, while my husband Jason smiled for an audience of wealthy real estate investors. He held a glass of bourbon and pointed to the brick exterior of the home I had purchased with my own inheritance long before I met him. He told those men that we jointly controlled the property and that he was ready to leverage my home to secure their capital. He expected me to nod along and play the exhausted, loyal wife. He assumed the postpartum fog had made me weak. Instead, I stepped forward and handed the lead investor a single, certified county document. What happened next made the investor set his drink down and back away in raw disgust. It made my polished Southern mother-in-law step out of the shadows and publicly expose her own son for stealing her retirement funds. And it left my husband standing on the pavement, stripped of his family, his financial backing, and his pride, while a process server handed him an eviction notice and a pre-packed duffel bag of his cheap clothes. But to understand how a man could lose his entire world in a matter of 60 seconds, you have to understand the night he walked out on me. Welcome to Emily Told Stories. Before we dive into exactly how this corporate takeover and marital betrayal unfolded, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy a story about poetic justice. Also, I would love to know how old you are and where you are listening from today. Drop it in the comments below. The fluorescent lights of the Mount Pleasant pharmacy hummed, casting a sickly pale glow over the cracked linoleum floor. I shifted my weight against the checkout counter, trying to find a position that did not pull at the stitches in my lower abdomen. A sharp, searing heat radiated from my C-section incision, traveling upward until it stole my breath. I brushed a hand against my side, and my fingers came away damp. The wound had seeped through the thick layers of gauze, blooming into a dark, undeniable stain against my loose cotton shirt. Against my chest, my 2-month-old daughter Lily thrashed in her fabric carrier. Her wails echoed off the aisles of cold medicine and greeting cards. It was a relentless, piercing sound of pure infant distress. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes and chipped nail polish, refused to look up at me. She slid my debit card across the laminate counter, her voice dropping to a quiet murmur. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It is declining." I blinked. The sterile air conditioning suddenly felt freezing against my feverish skin. A man in line behind me shifted his basket, letting out a heavy sigh that made my face burn with embarrassment. The words hung in the air, foreign and impossible. "Run it again, please. There has to be a mistake. We just deposited a check on Friday." The cashier tapped the screen, her acrylic nails clicking against the glass. She swiped the plastic strip again and stared at the monitor. Still declining. Insufficient funds. The memory of the previous night hit me like a physical blow. 24 hours earlier, the digital clock on our bedside table glowed a piercing red, displaying 3 in the morning. Our historic downtown Charleston house, usually a sanctuary of wide plank heart pine and high ceilings, felt like a suffocating cage. Lily had been screaming for 2 straight hours, her tiny face flushed dark pink with colic. I was trembling from the escalating fever of an untreated surgical infection, pacing the floorboards and dragging my feet because lifting them sent a jolt of fire through my torn abdominal muscles. Jason stood by his side of the walk-in closet, folding a light blue polo shirt. He did not toss his clothes into the leather duffel bag on the bed. He arranged them. Precise, deliberate, not a single wrinkle allowed. He smelled of expensive cedar cologne, a sharp contrast to the sour milk and cold sweat clinging to my own skin. He did not just pack for himself. I watched in a daze as he walked into the adjoining bedrooms and quietly woke our 6-year-old Jackson and our 4-year-old Harper. He whispered to them, promising a fun beach trip to their grandmother's house. He packed their small suitcases with the same cold efficiency, while I leaned against the doorframe, biting my lips so hard I tasted copper, just to keep from crying out in pain. Jackson rubbed his sleepy eyes and asked why Mommy and Lily were not coming. Jason did not even look at me when he answered. Mommy is sick, buddy. She needs to sleep. We are going to give her some quiet time. It was a calculated performance. He painted himself as the caring father, taking the kids out of the house to give his recovering wife a break. But the moment the kids were strapped into the SUV in the driveway, he came back inside for his own bag, and the facade dropped. Jason, please, I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of sheer exhaustion. I cannot stand up straight. My fever is getting worse. I need you to take her for just 10 minutes so I can sit down. He zipped the bag. The metallic rasp of the zippers sounded louder than the crying infant. He turned, his jaw set in a rigid line, his eyes cool and detached. The baby is too loud, Heidi. I need a break. I stared at him, unable to process the syllables. A break. I am taking the older kids. We are going to my mother's place on Kiowa Island. Everyone needs space right now. I cannot focus with all this noise. He hoisted the heavy leather strap over his shoulder, pausing to adjust his collar in the full-length mirror. He stepped seamlessly around a stack of unopened hospital bills resting on the Persian rug, never once looking down at the daughter crying against my chest. As he walked down the hallway, he paused at the heavy mahogany front door. He tapped the glowing keypad of our smart lock, letting out an exasperated sigh. You need to call the tech guy today. This system is glitchy again. I had to punch my code in twice yesterday just to get inside. Get it fixed before we get back. Then the heavy door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place, leaving me standing in the dark, entirely alone. The sweltering South Carolina heat wrapped around my sedan like a heavy, wet blanket as I pushed the shopping cart out of the pharmacy. The air conditioning struggled to push cool air against the windshield. I had bypassed the joint debit card and used a sleek silver credit card I kept hidden in the zippered compartment of my wallet. It was an emergency line I had kept active from my single days, long before the shared accounts and the marriage. It had paid for the specialized formula now sitting in the passenger seat. I sat in the driver's seat, the leather burning against the back of my legs through my thin pants. The engine idled, the vents blowing tepid air that smelled of hot asphalt and exhaust. I twisted around to check the baby mirror. Lily's chest rose and fell in a jagged rhythm, her eyelashes still wet from crying. I turned back around, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My thumb hovered over the banking app icon. The rational part of my brain, the part that managed historic properties and handled demanding tourists, told me to breathe. It was probably just a processing delay. Jason handled the utility payments. Maybe he moved funds to the checking account to cover the upcoming bills before leaving for the beach house. I tapped the app. The blue circle spun. When the balance loaded, I did not comprehend it at first. $42.16. I navigated to the transaction history. The screen refreshed, displaying the outgoing wire transfer. $25,000. The destination account was masked, showing only the last 4 digits. Digits I did not recognize. It was not our checking account. It was not the business payroll account. It was an external routing number. I pulled up the credit card profiles tied to our joint name. The balances were staggering. Cash advances, flight bookings, high-end retail charges pending from the last 48 hours. My heart hammered against my ribs loud enough that I thought it might wake the baby. That money was not just a safety net. It was the operational buffer for the heritage tourism business I had spent 8 years building from the ground up. It was supposed to cover payroll and quarterly property taxes for the historic estate. I scrolled down, searching for an explanation, a bank error, a fraudulent charge alert. There was nothing. Just a clean, authorized transfer, draining every cent of liquidity we had to our name. A wave of nausea washed over me, entirely unrelated to the infection brewing in my abdomen. Jason had not just walked out because the baby was crying. He had stripped the accounts bare on his way out the door. The man who had kissed my forehead in the recovery room less than 2 months ago had methodically planned to leave me stranded with a newborn, an infected surgical wound, and zero financial resources. I locked the car doors. The sound of the locks engaging felt final, like a gavel coming down. I was no longer just a struggling mother needing her husband to come home. I was a target. And Jason had just fired the first shot. The steering wheel felt rough against my damp palms as I navigated the winding suburban streets of Mount Pleasant. The South Carolina sun beat down on the roof of the sedan, baking the interior, but a cold sweat clung to the back of my neck. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, checking on Lily. She had finally surrendered to a restless sleep, her chest rising and falling in erratic little hitches. Every time I hit a pothole or a seam in the asphalt, a fresh wave of fire flared across my lower abdomen, radiating from the infected surgical wound. I needed an explanation. The $25,000 missing from our joint savings account was not a clerical error. It was a deliberate extraction. I pressed the voice command button on my steering wheel and ordered the system to call the Kiowa Island beach house. Jason grew up spending his summers at that sprawling oceanfront property. It was an imposing structure of weathered cedar shingles and wraparound porches guarded by iron gates and manicured palmettos. It was the place he always retreated to when real life became demanding. The line rang 3 times. The Bluetooth speaker filled the quiet car with the hollow electronic tone. Then the receiver clicked. "Hello." It was Constance. My mother-in-law possessed a voice that sounded like ice clinking in a crystal glass. Smooth, refined, and always carrying an unspoken judgment. Constance Andrews was a fixture in Charleston high society, a woman who valued appearances above air or water. She treated emotions like unsightly stains that needed to be scrubbed away immediately. "Constance, it is Heidi. I need to speak to Jason right now." A heavy pause stretched across the line. The silence felt thick, defensive. When she finally spoke, her tone was laced with a chilling, detached authority. "Heidi, what on earth are you doing calling the landline? Jason specifically told me you were quarantined." My brow furrowed. I merged onto the highway, the tires humming against the pavement. "Quarantined? What are you talking about?" Constance let out a quiet sigh, the kind she reserved for dealing with slow service at a country club. "Do not play games, Heidi. Jason arrived here at dawn, looking exhausted. He told me the hospital called last night. He said your surgical incision developed a highly contagious staph infection. He packed up the older children and brought them here to protect them, while you locked yourself in the master bedroom to sleep off the heavy antibiotics. He said you were not to be disturbed under any circumstances." My foot hovered over the brake pedal. The sheer audacity of the lie knocked the remaining breath from my lungs. Jason had not just abandoned me. He had spun a calculated medical narrative to ensure no one would check on me. He painted himself as the valiant father, shielding his vulnerable children from a biohazard while granting his sick wife the grace of uninterrupted rest. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It ensured Constance would not call the house, and it painted him as the hero of a story where I was the helpless infected victim. "I am not contagious, Constance. I am driving a car. I am sitting in Mount Pleasant with a fever and an empty bank account because your son just wired our entire savings to an unknown routing number. Put Jason on the phone." "He is not here," she replied, her voice tightening into a defensive knot. "He is resting. He had a very stressful morning. Managing this crisis you created. He went upstairs to the guest suite and requested absolute silence." While she spoke, a sound drifted through the receiver, cutting through the pristine quiet of the Kiowa estate. It was a high-pitched, breathless sob. I gripped the steering wheel, recognizing that specific pitch instantly. It was Harper. My 4-year-old daughter was crying, the kind of frantic, desperate wailing she only did when she was terrified or overwhelmed. "Listen to her," I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and maternal panic. "Harper is crying. Where is Jason? Why is he not with her?" I strained my ears, leaning toward the dashboard speaker. I waited to hear Jason's familiar baritone, soothing our little girl. Instead, a sharp, accented voice cut through the background noise. It was Maria, the estate nanny. She was shushing Harper, her tone hurried and impatient, urging the child to stop making a scene in the grand foyer. Constance did not even acknowledge her granddaughter's distress. Her voice remained perfectly modulated, a well-rehearsed script designed to smooth over any hint of dysfunction. "Maria is handling the children, Heidi. Jason is resting. You sound hysterical. I suggest you go back to sleep and let my son manage this difficult transition." The rehearsal in her tone was unmistakable. Constance was covering for him. She had spent Jason's entire life smoothing over his reckless decisions, paying off his early credit card debts, and smiling through his public tantrums. The Andrews family dealt in real estate and reputation. A crying child was a nuisance. A sick wife was a liability. The only thing that mattered to Constance was maintaining the illusion of the perfect, wealthy family. "Constance, listen to me very carefully," I said, my tone dropping into a low, dangerous register. "I am going to ask you one more time. Go upstairs, hand the phone to Jason." "I will do no such thing, Heidi. You are acting erratic. I am ending this call." The line went dead. The sudden quiet in the car was deafening. I drove the remaining 2 miles to our historic downtown home on pure autopilot. My mind was racing, cataloging the lies, layering the missing money over the fabricated staph infection. He wanted me isolated. He wanted me trapped in the house, unable to pay for help, unable to cause a scene, while he executed whatever plan he had set in motion. I pulled into the cobblestone driveway and shifted the car to park. The engine ticked as it cooled. I reached over to unbuckle Lily from her car seat, wincing as the movement pulled at my torn abdominal wall. The pain was a sharp, blinding flash, but the adrenaline surging through my veins pushed it into the background. I was done crying. The tears that had threatened to fall at the pharmacy were gone, replaced by a cold, analytical focus. The business owner in me, the woman who navigated ruthless city permitting boards and cutthroat tourism vendors, was waking up. I grabbed my phone from the center console, intending to call my attorney. Before my thumb could hit the screen, a push notification slid down from the top banner. It was not a text message. It was an automated alert from a frequent flyer rewards application. Years ago, when Jason and I first merged our finances, I had synced his travel accounts to my primary email to keep track of his business itineraries. He had forgotten to change the password. The small square icon of the airline logo glowed against the dark screen. I tapped the banner, pulling up the full message. "Passenger check-in successful. Passport scanned and verified. Departure Terminal E. Boarding begins in 20 minutes. My breath caught. I read the notification again, tracing the words with my eyes. Passport scanned. Terminal E was the international concourse at the Charleston airport. Jason was not resting in the guest suite at the Kiowa Beach House. He was not managing a family crisis. He had dumped our older children with a nanny, fed his mother a manufactured medical lie, and drained our operational capital to board an international flight. The puzzle pieces snapped into a terrifying, vivid picture. He was fleeing the country, and he was using the money meant to sustain my business and feed our newborn to finance his escape. The heavy mahogany front door of my historic Charleston home clicked shut behind me, sealing out the oppressive afternoon heat. The grand foyer was normally a source of immense pride, a testament to the years I had spent restoring the heart pine floors and the intricate crown molding. Today, the quiet hallway felt like a tomb. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning and the soft whimpering of the infant in my arms. I managed to unstrap Lily from her carrier, keeping my breathing shallow to prevent the abdominal stitches from pulling. The fever pulsed at my temples, a steady drumbeat of warning. I needed to sit down, but my mind was spinning with the airline notification. Terminal E, International Departure. I carried Lily up the sweeping staircase, leaning heavily against the banister. I navigated to the nursery, a room painted in soft sage greens and filled with antique furniture. I sank into the plush velvet nursing chair, allowing the cushions to absorb my weight. A fresh wave of heat radiated from my incision, a sharp reminder of the physical toll my body was enduring. As Lily finally latched, her frantic cries subsiding into quiet, rhythmic swallows, my gaze drifted across the room. Resting on the edge of the oak changing table was Jason's leather-bound iPad. He had left it behind. Under normal circumstances, that device was an extension of his hand, guarded with biometric locks and complex passcodes. He used it to manage his real estate ventures and monitor his private communications. But in his desperate rush to orchestrate his grand exit, to pack the older children and fabricate a medical crisis to his mother, he had made a fatal error. The tablet was plugged into the wall charger, the screen glowing faintly with a calendar notification. I leaned forward, stretching my arm across the small gap between the chair and the table. A jolt of fire flared across my lower stomach, but I ignored the sting. I grabbed the cold metal device. Because Jason and I shared a cloud ecosystem for the heritage tourism business, his tablet was synced to our network. I knew his manual passcode. It was the founding date of his first failed startup, a subtle nod to his unwavering ego. He never believed anyone would dare check his devices. I tapped the numbers on the glass. The home screen unlocked. I bypassed the usual icons, the banking apps we used for shared expenses, and the email clients tied to the household. I swiped left, diving into the app library. Buried inside a folder labeled Fitness Routines was a secondary social media application. It was an icon I did not recognize, tied to an account I had never seen. I tapped the square graphic. The profile loaded. It did not bear his real name, utilizing a clever pseudonym instead, but the profile picture was undeniably him. The feed was a curated digital gallery of an alternate reality. The geolocation tag stamped across the top of the grid read, Male Maldives. My breath caught in my throat. While I sat in a dimly lit nursery, bleeding rationing infant formula and trembling from an untreated staph infection, my husband was documenting a 5-star tropical paradise. The most recent upload was a high-resolution photograph of a private overwater bungalow. The turquoise water of the Indian Ocean sparkled beneath a cloudless sky. The caption beneath the photo read, "Disconnecting from the noise to find my center. Healing requires the right environment." My teeth ground together so hard my jaw ached. He was utilizing the very concept of mental health as a convenient shield to abandon his family and drain our operational capital. I scrolled down to a video posted just hours ago. Jason sat on the polished teak deck of a sleek white yacht, the ocean stretching endlessly behind him. The ocean breeze caught his perfectly styled hair. He raised a crystal flute of champagne toward the camera, a relaxed, careless grin spreading across his face. He looked vibrant. He looked untouched by the chaos he had left behind in South Carolina. I watched the short clip play twice. On the third loop, a detail near the edge of the frame caught my eye. The midday sun reflected harshly off his polarized designer sunglasses. I pressed 2 fingers to the screen, pinching the glass to zoom in on the mirrored lenses. The digital pixels blurred for a fraction of a second before snapping into sharp, undeniable focus. In the curve of the tinted glass, I saw the distorted but clear reflection of the person holding the camera. It was a woman. She wore a bright crimson swimsuit and a wide-brimmed straw hat. But it was her distinct, elaborate collarbone tattoo that gave her identity away. It was a winding, floral design I had seen countless times at corporate holiday parties and casual office drop-ins. It belonged to Sloane. Sloane was Jason's ambitious junior real estate partner. She was 25, drove a leased European sports car, and always spoke to me with a saccharine sweetness that never quite reached her eyes. Jason had always defended her late-night text messages and weekend phone calls as the relentless hustle required in commercial property development. This was not a solo journey of self-discovery. It was an illicit, romantic escape funded entirely by the $25,000 stolen from my joint accounts. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal threatened to choke me. My vision blurred with hot, angry tears blurring the bright screen of the tablet. But I forced myself to blink them away. Weeping would not recover the stolen funds. Crying would not secure my daughter's future or protect the business I had built. I needed a tactical strategy. Jason had orchestrated a complex illusion to keep me isolated. If he realized I knew the truth, he might move the remaining digital assets or block my access to the shared business drives. I had to keep him comfortable. I had to feed his delusion of control. I pulled my own smartphone from my pocket. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I crafted the ultimate diversion. I typed a message designed to validate every lie he had told himself and his mother. Jason, you were right. I cannot handle this. The fever is too high, and the baby will not stop crying. I am checking myself into a private medical clinic for the next few days to get IV antibiotics. My sister is driving up from Savannah to take Lily. Do not try to contact me until I am released. I need space to heal. I read the text twice, checking the tone. It was perfect. It painted me as the frail, overwhelmed wife incapable of managing the pressure. I hit send. It was a calculated risk, but I knew the man I married. He craved the narrative of the unstable spouse because it justified his own abhorrent behavior. Within 3 minutes, a red receipt appeared beneath my text bubble. He did not reply. He did not ask which clinic I was attending or how his newborn daughter was doing. The silence confirmed his relief. He believed he had won. Convinced that his wife was incapacitated and offline, he would stop monitoring the joint banking portals. He would stop looking over his shoulder. The trap was successfully set. With the decoy deployed, I turned my attention back to the synced iPad. The secret social media account was just the surface layer. I needed to uncover the full extent of the financial damage before making my next move. I opened his primary email application, bypassing the cluttered inbox and navigating straight to the archived folders. He was meticulous about hiding his tracks, but arrogance often breeds fatal carelessness. I used the search bar typing in keywords related to our banking institutions. Several mundane receipts populated. Then I searched the word underwriting. Buried deep in a subfolder labeled miscellaneous invoices, I found a lengthy email thread dating back 3 weeks. The sender was a senior executive at a prominent commercial lending firm based in Atlanta. The subject line sent a chill down my spine. Final authorization required, Heritage Estate Equity Line. A cold dread pooled in my stomach, far worse than the physical sting of the surgical wound. I opened the attached PDF document. The file took a moment to render, filling the screen with dense legal jargon. It was a draft for a 7-figure commercial loan. I scrolled to the second page, my eyes scanning the collateral listed on the application. It was the historic Charleston property. My property. The estate I had purchased with my late grandfather's inheritance, the deed resting solely in my name long before I ever met Jason. It was the physical headquarters of my heritage tourism company, the foundation of my entire livelihood. Jason was not merely cheating on me. He was not just draining our liquid savings for a tropical fling with his junior partner. He was actively orchestrating a fraudulent corporate maneuver to borrow against my premarital assets, attempting to salvage his own sinking real estate ventures. The Maldives trip was just a luxurious distraction, while the real crime was happening on paper. He was forging documents to steal my kingdom, and he was only one signature away from leaving me with nothing. The screen of the iPad burned bright in the quiet nursery, casting harsh shadows against the soft green walls. I stared at the dense paragraphs of the PDF document, my eyes scanning the rigid legal terminology. It was a formal loan application, submitted to a prominent commercial lender in Atlanta. The requested amount was a staggering $1.2 million. Jason was attempting to secure the capital, to inject life into his failing suburban strip mall developments. Those projects had been bleeding money for 18 months, plagued by supply chain delays and fleeing tenants. He had hidden the true extent of his professional failures behind tailored suits and expensive dinners. But the most terrifying part of the document was the collateral section. To secure the seven-figure sum, he had listed the historic Charleston estate. My estate. I scrolled with trembling fingers down to the final page of the application where the signature lines resided. There, rendered in flawless blue digital ink, was my signature. It was a perfect replica of the way I signed my name, looping the H and crossing the T with a sharp downward stroke. He had traced it from our joint tax returns. Beside my forged signature sat a digital rendering of an official state notary seal. It certified that I had appeared in person, presented valid identification, and willingly consented to leverage my ancestral home for this commercial debt. I zoomed in on the circular notary stamp, reading the name printed in bold block letters across the center. Sloane Elizabeth Vance. The air in the nursery seemed to thin out, leaving me gasping for a full breath. The junior partner. The woman sipping champagne on the yacht in the Maldives. She was not just a naive mistress enjoying a free tropical vacation. She was a licensed South Carolina notary public, actively participating in a coordinated felony. The reality of the situation crashed over me, rewriting the entire narrative of the past 24 hours. The betrayal instantly shifted from a painful marital abandonment to a calculated corporate takeover. Jason and Sloane were operating as a criminal syndicate. They were utilizing my postpartum vulnerability as a smokescreen, assuming I would be too distracted by the crying newborn and the surgical fever to notice the complex legal maneuverings happening in the background. They planned to steal the equity of my kingdom while I was trapped upstairs recovering from childbirth. I set the cold metal tablet down on the changing table. My hands shook so intensely I had to clasp them together against my chest. I looked down at Lily, who had finally drifted into a deep, exhausted slumber in her crib. She looked so small, so fragile. I needed to protect her. But before I could figure out how to dismantle a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, my body demanded a toll. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the drive from the pharmacy suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a crushing wave of physical agony. The infection in my C-section wound flared, sending a blinding spike of heat through my nerves. I limped out of the nursery and dragged myself into the master bathroom. The room was expansive, lined with white Carrara marble and polished chrome fixtures. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me, sliding the brass bolt into place, as if it could keep the reality of my ruined marriage out in the hallway. I sank onto the cold tile floor, resting my back against the edge of the porcelain bathtub. I reached up and pulled a thick white cotton towel from the heated rack, pressing it firmly against my seeping lower abdomen. The physical pain was excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the grief tearing open my chest. I closed my eyes and the pristine bathroom faded away, replaced by a memory from 7 years ago. I remembered standing in this exact spot when the house was nothing more than a neglected, crumbling shell. I had purchased the property using the inheritance my late grandfather left me. The roof had been caving in, and the original heart pine floors were buried under decades of cheap linoleum. For 2 years, I spent every waking hour restoring the estate. I peeled away century-old wallpaper until my fingernails bled. I sanded the floorboards, breathing in the sawdust and the history of the city until my lungs ached. I built the heritage tourism business from the dirt up, transforming a ruined structure into a premier destination that celebrated the deep-rooted Gullah culture and coastal elegance of the South. Jason had been my biggest champion back then. I remembered him walking into the dusty construction zone carrying 2 cups of iced sweet tea. He would kiss my sweat-streaked forehead and tell me he was in awe of my vision. He used to look at me with genuine respect. Sitting on the cold marble floor, I mourned the man I thought I knew. I wept silently, biting down on the thick cotton towel to muffle my sobs so I would not wake the baby. I realized in that dark moment that people do not transform into monsters overnight. It happens in invisible increments. A compromised boundary here, a selfish financial decision there. Jason had slowly morphed from a supportive partner into a parasite, feeding off my success until he felt entitled to consume it entirely. He had stopped seeing me as a wife and started viewing me as an uncooperative asset. I allowed myself to cry for 10 minutes. I shed tears for the shattered illusion of my family, for the father my children just lost, and for the sheer, terrifying exhaustion of having to fight a war while my body was broken. Then I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I took a deep, shaky breath and forced myself to stand up, using the edge of the vanity for leverage. The mourning period was over. I turned on the brass faucet and splashed freezing water onto my flushed face. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with dark circles, but the panic had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hardened resolve. I was not going to let a mediocre real estate developer and his 25-year-old assistant steal the legacy I built with my bare hands. Before I could formulate my first tactical move, a sound shattered the heavy silence of the house. It was a sharp, authoritative knock echoing from the grand foyer downstairs. I froze. The heavy brass knocker struck the front door 3 more times, rattling the stained glass transoms. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had Jason figured out my lie? Did he send someone from his office to check on the house? I grabbed my phone and checked the security camera feed. Standing on my front porch was a broad-shouldered man in a cheap gray suit. He held a thick manila envelope tucked under his right arm. He did not look like a friend or a neighbor. He looked like official business. I gritted my teeth against the burning pain in my stomach and began the slow, agonizing descent down the sweeping staircase. Each step sent a fresh jolt of fire through my abdominal wall, but I kept my posture rigid. I reached the foyer, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy door open. The humid afternoon air rushed in. The man looked at me, his eyes briefly dropping to the dark stain on my shirt before snapping back to my face. His expression remained entirely neutral, a professional mask worn by someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Heidi Andrews, yes," I answered, my voice raspy but steady. He extended the manila envelope toward my chest. "You have been served." He did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel and walked briskly down the cobblestone path toward a sedan parked on the street. I stood in the doorway, the humid breeze rustling the edges of the envelope in my hands. The return address printed in the top left corner belonged to a regional commercial bank based in Colombia. It was not the same lender from the iPad documents. I tore the glued flap open, my thumb catching on the heavy parchment paper inside. I unfolded the document. It was a formal notice of default. The legal text outlined a revolving business credit line opened 18 months ago. The principal balance was $50,000. The account was currently 90 days past due, accumulating staggering late fees and penalty interest. I scanned the borrower information. The primary account holder was Jason's Failing Real Estate LLC, but listed directly beneath his company name, designated as the unconditional personal guarantor, was me. He had used my name, my pristine credit score, and my social security number to secure the funds. He had hidden the statements, intercepted the mail, and allowed the debt to rot. Now the bank was initiating aggressive collection proceedings. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was shifting. The fraudulent $1 million loan attempt was the future threat, but this default notice was the immediate peril. Jason had left me holding a live grenade. The creditors were not going to pursue a man sipping champagne in the Indian Ocean. They were coming for the woman standing in the doorway. I stood in the grand foyer, staring at the heavy parchment paper in my hands. The notice of default felt heavy weighing down my wrists, with the reality of a $50,000 debt I never authorized. A strange, profound shift occurred in the quiet space of that hallway. The suffocating grief that had driven me to my knees on the bathroom floor evaporated. The tears dried against my flushed cheeks, leaving my skin tight and cold. Crying was a luxury for women who had a safety net. I was standing on a trap door, and my husband was holding the lever. I slid the deadbolt locked. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of ice water, and swallowed the heavy, prescribed antibiotics I had neglected all morning. The burning sensation across my surgical incisions still pulsed a steady drumbeat of physical trauma, but I pushed it into a mental lockbox. I could hurt later. Right now, I needed a weapon. I opened my phone and scrolled through my professional contacts, bypassing friends and family. I stopped on a contact card labeled Diana Rossi. Diana was a terrifyingly brilliant attorney who operated a boutique firm in downtown Charleston, specializing in intersecting corporate litigation and high-asset family law. We had met 3 years prior during a brutal zoning dispute regarding my heritage tourism property. I watched her dismantle a city councilman in a public hearing without ever raising her voice. She wore impeccable tailored suits, never showed an ounce of emotion, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. She was exactly the kind of apex predator I required. The phone rang twice before she answered. Her voice was crisp and alert, carrying the ambient hum of a busy law office in the background. Heidi. It has been a while. Tell me you are not facing another Heritage Foundation lawsuit. I took a slow breath, grounding my feet against the cool hardwood floor. I need to retain your services, Diana. Today. It is not a zoning issue. It is a hostile corporate takeover disguised as a marital abandonment. The background noise on her end vanished, indicating she had closed her office door. I have a legal pad in front of me, she stated, her tone shifting into a sharp professional register. Give me the facts. Do not sugarcoat anything. I leaned against the kitchen island and laid out the entire sequence of events. I detailed the 3 a.m. departure, the fabricated staph infection lie fed to his mother, the missing $25,000, and the declined debit card. I told her about the secret social media account, the geotagged yacht in the Indian Ocean, and the reflection of Sloan, his junior partner. Finally, I described the forged $1.2 million commercial loan application sitting in his iPad files, complete with a fraudulent notary stamp. I ended by reading the account number off the fresh notice of default currently resting on my marble countertop. Diana did not gasp. She did not offer hollow sympathies or exclaim how terrible Jason was. She processed the information with the cold efficiency of a chess grandmaster analyzing a board. Heidi, she began, her voice steady and commanding. You are currently holding a live wire. Your husband is executing a coordinated strategy to insulate himself while liquidating your equity. If you lash out right now, you will hand him the advantage. He wants you to act like a hysterical, exhausted postpartum stereotype. It feeds his narrative. I tightened my grip on the phone. What is our first move? Diana delivered a directive that would become the foundation of my entire survival strategy. Do not let anger create problems. Let the paperwork protect you. From this second forward, you do not send him a single emotional text message. You do not demand answers. You play the role of the incapacitated wife perfectly. While he is distracted by his island vacation, you and I are going to build an ironclad forensic vault. I need every digital footprint he left behind. Can you get me the data? I pulled my laptop from my leather work tote and flipped the screen open. Consider it done. For the next 4 hours, the dining room table transformed into a war room. I plugged Jason's abandoned iPad into my computer and began a systematic extraction. The physical pain radiating from my abdomen became background noise, drowned out by the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard. I treated my husband's betrayal like a forensic audit, deploying the same analytical rigor I used to manage complex tourism logistics and historical preservation grants. I created a master digital folder with strict subcategories. I built intricate spreadsheets tracking every anomaly. Column A contained the date. Column B listed the fraudulent action. Column C tracked the location data. I cross-referenced the login timestamps on our joint banking portals with the time zones in the Maldives, matching the exact minute the $25,000 vanished to his arrival at the tropical resort. I downloaded the forged loan application, taking high-resolution screenshots of Sloane's illegal notary stamp. I pulled the metadata from the PDF file, proving it had been created, modified, and saved from Jason's specific user profile. I combed through months of shared credit card statements, highlighting expensive dinners, luxury hotel bookings, and boutique jewelry purchases he had categorized as business development expenses. Every new row on the spreadsheet, every verified fact added to the folder, stripped away a layer of my panic. The sheer act of organizing the chaos gave me a profound sense of tactical control. Jason had assumed my postpartum state made me weak. He failed to remember that running a successful company required a ruthless attention to detail. I was mapping his destruction, cell by highlighted cell. By late afternoon, Lily woke up demanding to be fed. I warmed a bottle of the specialized formula I had purchased with my secret credit card. I sat in the rocking chair feeding my daughter while reviewing the downloaded bank statements on my phone. The fever had broken, leaving me exhausted but clear-headed. I was no longer the prey waiting in the dark. I was the architect of the impending trap. My phone buzzed, vibrating against the wooden armrest of the chair. It was Diana. I shifted Lily onto my shoulder, gently patting her back, and answered the call. "Did you receive the encrypted folders?" I asked. "I received them," she replied, her tone carrying a strange, heavy edge. "Your documentation is flawless, Heidi. The loan forgery alone is enough to initiate severe criminal proceedings against both your husband and his junior partner. But we have a new development, a significant one." I stopped rocking. "What did you find?" "I had my forensic accountant run a rapid trace on the routing number that absorbed your $25,000, Diana explained. "Jason routed your funds through a domestic shell account before wiring it offshore to pay for the resort. My accountant pulled the transaction ledger for that specific shell entity to map his capital flow. Your stolen savings were not the only funds sitting in that holding account." My brow furrowed. Jason had been complaining about a tight market for a year. His strip mall projects were stalling. Where else would he get money? Who else is he stealing from? I asked, the dread creeping back into my throat. Diana paused, letting the silence emphasize the gravity of her discovery. He has been injecting staggering sums of capital into his failing real estate limited liability companies over the past 8 months. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, Heidi. My team traced the origin of those secondary wire transfers. The money is not coming from outside investors. It is flowing directly out of an irrevocable estate trust. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind raced back to the phone call from that morning. I pictured the sprawling Kiowa Island beach house, the manicured lawns, and the cold, rehearsed voice of my mother-in-law. Constance. I whispered the name, tasting like ash. Yes, Diana confirmed. He is not just liquidating your business assets. Jason is quietly, methodically draining his own mother's retirement trust fund. The revelation hit me with staggering force. The man sipping champagne on a yacht halfway across the world had not just betrayed his wife. He was a financial predator, cannibalizing his entire family tree to fund his delusions of grandeur. He had abandoned his children, forged my signature, and left me drowning in debt. But he had also stolen the financial security of the very woman who was currently defending him. Constance Andrews believed her son was a tired hero seeking refuge from a sick wife. She had no idea she was harboring the man who was actively destroying her future. And I was the only person holding the evidence. I printed the financial ledgers. The heavy printer in my home office hummed, spitting out page after page of undeniable proof. I gathered the warm sheets of paper, aligning the edges, tapping them against the mahogany desk. I placed the stack inside a simple manila folder. I picked up Lily from her bassinet, securing her in the car seat. The drive to Kiowa Island took 45 minutes. The coastal highway stretched out before me, bordered by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The scenic route usually brought me peace, but today, the landscape blurred into a smear of green and gray. Every bump in the road sent a sharp flare of heat through my abdominal stitches, reminding me of my physical fragility. But my mind was sharp, calculating cold. The Kiowa estate loomed at the end of a private winding driveway. It was a sprawling architectural marvel of weathered cedar and expansive glass windows, designed to project generational wealth. I parked my sedan behind Constance's pristine luxury SUV. I unbuckled Lily, holding her close to my chest, and grabbed the manila folder. The midday humidity clung to my skin as I marched up the sweeping front steps. I did not ring the doorbell. I raised my fist and knocked firmly against the solid oak door. Footsteps echoed from the grand foyer. The door swung open, revealing Constance. She wore a tailored linen dress, her silver hair styled in perfect, rigid waves. She looked like a woman stepping out of a country club editorial. Her expression hardened the moment she saw me. She stepped into the threshold, physically blocking the entrance. "Heidi, what are you doing here?" she demanded, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "Jason explicitly stated you have a highly contagious staph infection. You are supposed to be quarantined. You cannot bring that risk into my home around the children." I did not retreat. I met her icy stare, refusing to shrink under her usual intimidating presence. "I am not contagious, Constance. Your son is a liar. Step aside." I pushed past her shoulder, ignoring her offended gasp. I walked straight down the wide hallway toward the designer kitchen. The house felt eerily quiet. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in a distant wing, but the immediate space was silent. Constance followed closely behind me, her heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floors. "You are trespassing, Heidi. I will call security if you do not leave this instant," she threatened, rounding the massive marble kitchen island to face me. I dropped the manila folder onto the pristine white marble countertop. The thick stack of papers landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "Do not call security. Call your wealth manager." Constance paused her hand, hovering near the landline telephone on the wall. She glanced down at the folder, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in confusion. "What is this?" "That is the reality of your son's impromptu beach vacation," I said, my voice steady and devoid of empathy. "Jason is not resting upstairs. He is not recovering from a family crisis. He is currently sitting on a private yacht in the Indian Ocean with his 25-year-old junior partner. Constance let out a short, dismissive laugh, a practiced sound designed to shut down gossip. That is absurd. Jason is upstairs. I reached out and flipped the folder open. I spread the printed documents across the marble surface, aligning the geotagged photographs next to the financial ledgers Diana had unearthed. Look at the timestamps, Constance. Look at the banking routes. He drained $25,000 from my business operating account to charter that boat. But that is the small fraction. The real theft involves you. She stepped closer, her gaze dropping to the high-resolution images of Jason holding a champagne flute. I watched her eyes flick to the woman reflected in his sunglasses. A subtle tremor began in her hands, but she kept her chin elevated, clinging to her socialite armor. Men have indiscretions, Heidi. She murmured her tone, turning patronizing. It is unfortunate, and it is humiliating for you. But successful men face immense pressure. I suspected he was entertaining that young assistant months ago. I chose to ignore it, to preserve the family dignity. You should learn to do the same. This does not explain why you are marching into my kitchen, acting like a deranged woman. The cold pragmatism of her admission sent a chill down my spine. She had known about the affair and deemed it an acceptable flaw in her golden boy. She was willing to sacrifice my marriage to protect the flawless Andrews family image. I tapped my index finger against the bottom document. The affair is not the issue, Constance. The felony is the issue. Open your laptop. Log into your irrevocable estate trust. Now. Something in my unwavering stare broke through her polished exterior. She turned and retrieved a slim silver laptop from a nearby desk. She set it on the island, her hands shaking noticeably as she typed her complex password. The banking portal loaded, displaying the crest of her elite financial institution. She clicked on the primary portfolio tab. The screen refreshed. Constance let out a sound that I will never forget. It was not a scream. It was a hollow, breathless wheeze like a physical blow had just collapsed her lungs. Her knees buckled. She reached out, gripping the edge of the marble counter so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. The account balance staring back at her was a fraction of what it should have been. I pointed to the recent withdrawal history displayed on her screen. 6 figures gone, then another 6 figures transferred 3 weeks later. The destination routing numbers matched the domestic shell companies Jason used to funnel his stolen capital. He treated your retirement trust like a limitless ATM, I explained, my voice devoid of pity. He is drowning in debt. His suburban developments are failing. He forged my signature yesterday attempting to take out a 7-figure commercial loan against my historic property. When that failed to process fast enough, he turned to your accounts to fund his escape. The proud Southern matriarch who had spent her entire life curating an image of untouchable grace physically crumbled before my eyes. Her pristine linen dress seemed to swallow her fragile frame. She sank onto a tall bar stool, pressing her trembling hands over her mouth. The flawless illusion of her successful, devoted son shattered into sharp, jagged pieces. She had covered for his reckless spending during college, she had bought his first sports car, and she had turned a blind eye to his infidelity. She had enabled the monster, and the monster had just devoured her life savings. He took it. All she whispered, tears finally breaking through her rigid composure, spilling down her cheeks and ruining her expensive makeup. He took everything. I did not offer her a comforting embrace. We were no longer family. We were simply 2 women standing in the wreckage caused by the exact same man. I gathered my printed documents, sliding them back into the manila folder. I need to get my children. Constance did not argue. She remained seated at the kitchen island, staring blankly at the glowing screen of her ruined portfolio. I walked down the long hallway toward the faint sound of the television. I found Jackson and Harper sitting on the floor of the media room. They looked disheveled. Harper was wearing the same clothes she had on yesterday morning. Her hair was tangled, and a faint smear of dried chocolate lingered on her cheek. The nanny Maria sat in a corner chair scrolling mindlessly through her phone, ignoring the children entirely. I stepped into the room. "Mommy's here. We're going home." Jackson jumped up, a look of profound relief washing over his face. He grabbed his younger sister's hand, pulling her toward me. I knelt down, wincing, as my abdominal stitches pulled, holding them both tightly against my chest. The scent of stale snacks and unwashed hair clung to them. Jason had not just abandoned his wife, he had discarded his children the moment they became an inconvenience. I instructed Maria to gather their packed suitcases and bring them to the foyer. She looked startled by my sudden appearance, but the fierce determination in my eyes stopped any questions she might have asked. I stood in the grand entrance, holding Lily in her carrier, while Jackson and Harper clung to my legs. Maria rolled the small suitcases down the hall. I turned to look toward the kitchen one last time. Constance remained exactly where I left her, a broken silhouette sitting in the shadows of her sprawling, empty mansion. I ushered my children out the front door, guiding them toward my parked sedan. The coastal heat felt oppressive, but the fierce protective instinct driving my actions kept my focus sharp. I opened the rear doors, helping Jackson buckle his seatbelt. I reached for Harper's car seat straps, pulling them snug across her small shoulders. As I closed the rear passenger door, a sharp vibration echoed from the front seat. My phone was resting on the center console. The screen illuminated, displaying a new text message notification. I walked around the hood of the car, sliding into the driver's seat. I picked up the device. The sender was Jason. He was supposed to be ignoring me. My decoy text claiming I was entering a medical clinic should have secured his silence for at least 48 hours. I unlocked the screen, tapping the green message bubble. The words staring back at me made my blood run cold. He was not checking on my health. He was not asking about the baby. He was initiating a new, terrifying phase of his plan. "I need you to wire $10,000 to my business account immediately. It is for critical networking expenses. If the funds do not clear by tomorrow morning, I will not be able to sign the private school enrollment contracts for Jackson and Harper. The deadline is Friday, Heidi. Do not ruin their education over your stubbornness." I stared at the glowing text. He was stranded on a tropical island with his mistress, funded by stolen money, and he was utilizing the educational future of our children as leverage to extort me for more cash. He viewed his own son and daughter as mere bargaining chips. The financial theft was devastating, but this demand proved his moral bankruptcy was bottomless. He had just initiated a hostage negotiation using the people I loved most as collateral. The glowing screen of my smartphone illuminated the dim interior of the sedan. $10,000. Jason wanted me to wire a small fortune to his corporate account for critical networking expenses. The sheer audacity paralyzed my lungs. My husband was thousands of miles away, lounging under tropical palms with his junior assistant, sipping top-shelf liquor paid for by my stolen savings. Yet he had the nerve to demand more. He masked his extortion behind the guise of professional necessity. But the true venom lay in the second sentence. If the funds did not clear by tomorrow morning, he would refuse to sign the private academy enrollment contracts. Jackson was supposed to start first grade at a prestigious Charleston preparatory school in exactly 3 weeks. The institution required dual parental signatures on all financial agreements. The deadline was Friday. Jason knew how hard I had worked to secure that admission. He understood the waiting lists were years long and the interviews were grueling. We had already purchased the tiny navy blue blazer and the plaid tie. By withholding his signature, he was actively threatening to derail our son's educational future. He was utilizing his own flesh and blood as leverage to extract vacation money. I lifted my gaze to the rearview mirror. Jackson sat quietly in his booster seat, staring out the window at the sprawling oak trees lining the Kiowa Island driveway. His small hands clutched a worn stuffed elephant. Harper was curled up beside him, sucking her thumb in exhausted silence. A sudden vivid memory pierced my heart. I remembered a rainy Tuesday evening 3 years ago. Jason had come home early from his office, dropping his leather briefcase in the hallway. He scooped Jackson up, spinning him around until the room echoed with pure childish laughter. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching my husband sit on the edge of the toddler bed. Jason held a battered copy of a picture book reading aloud, doing exaggerated, silly voices that made our boy giggle endlessly. Looking at the extortion demand glowing in my palm, I struggled to reconcile the man from that rainy evening with the predator currently draining my life. I realized a profound, terrifying truth about human nature. People do not transform into monsters overnight. There is no sudden, dramatic villain origin story. It happens through a slow, insidious erosion of character. A skipped family dinner justified by a late meeting. A small lie about a credit card bill. A flirtatious text message erased before walking through the front door. Jason did not wake up one morning and decide to destroy his family. He simply made one selfish choice after another. He kept choosing his own comfort, his own ego, his own desires, until those choices devoured everything good inside him. The father who read bedtime stories was gone, leaving behind a hollow shell of vanity and greed. I was not going to negotiate with a man who held his own children hostage. Giving him the $10,000 would not secure his signature. It would only prove that his manipulative tactics worked. It would fund another week of luxury resort living while I struggled to buy groceries. I placed my thumbs over the digital keyboard. My response needed to be calculated, devoid of the hysterical emotion he expected. I typed 2 simple words. Request denied. I hit send. I did not elaborate. I did not plead for my son's academic future or hurl insults about his illicit tropical vacation. I tossed the device onto the passenger seat, shifted the vehicle into drive, and pulled away from the sprawling estate. The journey back to downtown Charleston felt like traversing a hostile landscape. The afternoon traffic crawled along the coastal highway. The physical agony of my infected surgical wound flared with every sudden stop, sending sharp spikes of heat radiating through my torso. I gripped the steering wheel, relying on sheer maternal adrenaline to keep my posture upright. The South Carolina sun beat down mercilessly against the windshield, but my focus remained absolute. Jackson and Harper fell asleep in the back, their quiet, rhythmic breathing providing a fragile soundtrack of peace in a rapidly collapsing world. We finally reached our historic property. The cobblestone driveway offered a familiar, comforting embrace. I gathered my sleeping children, ushering them inside the cool, quiet sanctuary of the grand foyer. I settled Jackson and Harper onto the living room sofa, turning on an educational cartoon to occupy their attention. I carried Lily upstairs to the nursery, placing her gently into her wooden crib. My body begged for rest. The fever hummed beneath my skin, a relentless reminder of my physical vulnerability. But sleep was a luxury I could not afford. The war had just begun, and I needed to fortify my commercial defenses. I walked into my home office, a bright room overlooking the lush courtyard garden. My heritage tourism company operated through a centralized cloud software system. It managed our ticketing portals, employee payroll, vendor contracts, and private historical tour schedules. It was the digital beating heart of my entire enterprise, generating the revenue that kept a roof over our heads. I sat down at the heavy oak desk, booting up my laptop. I needed to ensure the remaining operational funds were securely locked away from any shared platforms. The screen brightened, displaying my desktop background. I double-clicked the icon for my business management application. The familiar login portal appeared. I typed my administrative username and entered my complex password. I hit enter, anticipating the dashboard to load. Instead, the screen flashed red. A small dialog box popped up in the center of the monitor. Error, invalid credentials. My brow furrowed. I assumed my exhausted brain had mistyped the sequence. I carefully re-entered the characters, making sure the capitalization was perfect. I pressed the return key again. Error. Account access revoked. Please contact your system administrator. A cold wave of dread washed over me, instantly chilling the feverish heat of my skin. I was the system administrator. I had built the company from the ground up. But a bitter realization struck me. During our first year of marriage, Jason had insisted on setting up the initial IT infrastructure. He claimed he wanted to help his busy wife manage the technical workload. Under the guise of a supportive spouse, he had granted himself a mirrored master account for emergency technical support. I grabbed my smartphone from the desk. My inbox showed 3 new automated emails from my software provider. The timestamps correlated perfectly with the exact moment I denied his financial extortion request. The first email confirmed a successful password change. The second email confirmed an alteration to the primary administrative recovery protocols. The third email was the fatal blow. It notified me that my specific user profile had been permanently disabled. Jason had not taken my refusal lightly. Sitting in his 5-star overwater bungalow, thousands of miles away, he had weaponized his hidden technical access. In direct retaliation for denying his demand for $10,000, he was attempting to paralyze my livelihood. He had locked me out of the operational brain of my own company, holding my entire heritage tourism enterprise hostage in real time. The glowing red error message on my monitor should have sent me into a blind panic. It was designed to break my spirit. Jason intended for me to stare at that invalid credentials notification and dissolve into a puddle of helpless tears. He wanted me to realize my heritage tourism company, the enterprise I built with my own hands, was tethered to his technical mercy. But as I sat in my quiet home office, the initial shock quickly dissolved into a sharp, icy satisfaction. Jason was incredibly arrogant. That vanity made him profoundly predictable. He thought his digital retaliation was a brilliant checkmate. He forgot who he was playing against. During the 4 hours I spent compiling the forensic audit with Diana earlier that afternoon, we had mapped out every potential vulnerability. My attorney possessed a mind honed by years of ruthless corporate litigation. She knew that financial predators always attack the primary revenue stream when they feel challenged. We anticipated his attempt to hijack the software. We just needed him to make the first move to prove his intent. I picked up my smartphone and dialed Diana's direct line. She answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and alert. "He took the bait," I stated, keeping my tone even despite the fever humming in my veins. "He just altered the primary administrative protocols on my business management application. I am locked out of the front-end dashboard." "Excellent, Diana," replied the faint clicking of her keyboard echoing over the speaker. "He believes he holds the keys because he controls the two-factor authentication on the software layer. But he is a fool, Heidi. The software is just a superficial interface. The actual merchant gateways, the corporate charter, and the underlying financial infrastructure are registered under your legal identity. We do not need to hack his passwords. We are going to amputate his access at the root. Meet me at the commercial banking headquarters downtown in 20 minutes. I ended the call and stood up. The sudden vertical movement triggered a blinding flash of agony across my lower abdomen. The C-section infection was no longer a dull ache, it was a searing knife dragging across my skin with every breath. I gripped the edge of the oak desk, waiting for the dark spots to clear from my vision. I could not falter now. I walked down the hall and asked my trusted elderly neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, to sit on the living room sofa while Jackson Harper and Lily slept. She took one look at my pale, sweaty face and nodded, her expression filled with silent, grandmotherly concern. The drive to the financial district required every ounce of my remaining endurance. The cobblestone streets of historic Charleston jolted the sedan, sending fresh waves of fire through my stitched muscles. I parked near the towering glass and steel structure of the commercial bank, a stark contrast to the historic architecture surrounding it. I navigated the revolving doors, entering a sprawling lobby of polished granite and hushed conversations. Diana was waiting for me near the elevators, wearing an immaculate charcoal suit. She took one look at my rigid posture and the sheer effort it took to walk, but she did not offer hollow sympathy. She merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a warrior entering the battlefield. We rode the elevator to the executive floor, stepping into a sprawling boardroom overlooking the harbor. The air conditioning was frigid, raising goosebumps on my damp skin. A long mahogany table dominated the space, flanked by leather ergonomic chairs. The bank vice president, a tall man with a stern professional demeanor, stood waiting with a stack of thick legal documents arranged neatly in the center of the table. "Ms. Andrews," he greeted, extending a silver fountain pen. "Your attorney informed me of the situation. We have prepared the emergency corporate restructuring forms." I stepped up to the edge of the mahogany table. My legs trembled. The fever was spiking, blurring the edges of my peripheral vision. A heavy bead of sweat rolled down the back of my neck. Every nerve ending in my torso screamed for relief, urging me to sink into one of the plush leather chairs. The vice president noticed my pale complexion and gestured toward a seat. "Please sit down, Ms. Andrews. This will take a few moments to initial." I shook my head, planting my feet firmly onto the carpet. "No, thank you." I refused to sit. Sitting felt like yielding. Sitting felt like succumbing to the weakness Jason expected of me. I needed to stand tall while I dismantled his empire. I took the silver fountain pen, grasping the cool metal barrel. Diana stood beside me, pointing to the designated signature lines. "By signing this document, Heidi, you are legally revoking Jason's executive status across all banking platforms," she explained, her voice echoing in the quiet boardroom. "You are severing his authorization to access the corporate merchant accounts. This supersedes any software password he created. Once the ink dries, the bank will override the software interface and restore your administrative control." I pressed the nib of the pen against the thick paper. I signed my name using the exact same signature Jason had forged just hours earlier. I looped the H and crossed the T with a sharp, definitive stroke. The moment I lifted the pen, the vice president pulled the document toward him, stamping it with the official institutional seal. "It is done," he confirmed. "I am authorizing the override now." I was not finished. "What about the corporate credit lines?" I asked, my voice raspy but unyielding. "The black cards carrying my company logo." The vice president tapped his tablet, accessing the mainframe. "I can freeze them instantly," he stated. "They will decline at any point of sale worldwide, effective immediately." "Do it," I commanded. He pressed a single button on his screen. The deed was finalized. In a matter of seconds, a corporate guillotine fell, severing the financial blood supply Jason relied upon to fund his extravagant illusion. He was no longer a managing director. He was no longer an authorized user. He was a ghost, holding pieces of dead plastic. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving me swaying slightly against the edge of the table. Diana reached out, grasping my elbow to steady my balance. "You did it, Heidi," she murmured, her tone softening for the first time all day. "You took your kingdom back." Half a world away, the sun was setting over the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of violet and gold. The tropical evening breeze swept across the private teak deck of a five-star Maldivian restaurant. The air carried the rich scent of grilled lobster and expensive spices. Jason sat at a secluded corner table illuminated by the soft glow of a flickering candle. He wore a crisp white linen shirt, the top two buttons undone, to display his fresh tan. Across from him, Sloane swirled a glass of vintage Pinot Noir, her crimson designer dress catching the ambient light. Soft acoustic music played in the background, crafting an atmosphere of pure, unadulterated luxury. Jason reached for his smartphone resting next to a silver platter of imported caviar. He tapped the screen, checking his messages. The screen remained blank. No frantic texts from his wife begging for access to her business. No desperate pleas for him to sign the school enrollment forms. He smiled, a smug, self-satisfied grin spreading across his face. He interpreted the silence as total surrender. He assumed Heidi was sitting in their Charleston home, defeated, broken, and entirely subjugated to his will. He believed his technical lockout had crushed her spirit, proving once and for all that he was the irreplaceable architect of their lives. He raised his own crystal glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive wine. He looked across the table at his young junior partner, feeling like a conquering king surveying a vast tropical empire. He had orchestrated the perfect escape. He had isolated his wife, funded a lavish romance, and positioned himself to steal a multi-million-dollar real estate asset. The waiter approached the table carrying a leather-bound menu, presenting the chef tasting options for the evening. Jason did not even look at the prices. He pointed to the most extravagant seafood tower on the list, feeling the heavy weight of his black corporate card resting safely in his wallet. He ordered another bottle of champagne, leaning back in his chair to enjoy the gentle ocean breeze. He was completely unaware that thousands of miles away, in a frigid Charleston boardroom, a pen had just crossed a page. He had no idea that the invisible floor beneath his feet had already vanished, leaving him suspended over a terrifying abyss. The financial lifeline that sustained his entire tropical fantasy was severed, and the incoming crash was only moments away. The tropical evening draped over the Maldives resort like a warm velvet blanket. Jason reclined in a handcrafted teak chair on the private deck of an exclusive overwater restaurant. The Indian Ocean stretched out before him, a vast expanse of indigo water, reflecting the silver light of a rising moon. Gentle waves lapped against the wooden pilings supporting the dining platform, providing a rhythmic, soothing soundtrack. A gentle sea breeze carried the rich aroma of seared Wagyu beef and roasted garlic. Across the table, Sloane adjusted the delicate strap of her silk evening gown, her dark hair catching the warm, amber glow of a nearby candle. Jason raised a crystal flute of vintage champagne, bringing the rim to his lips. He tasted the crisp, expensive bubbles, feeling an overwhelming sense of triumph. He believed he had orchestrated a flawless escape. His wife was trapped in South Carolina, nursing a newborn, and battling a surgical infection entirely neutralized. Meanwhile, he was thousands of miles away, securing a $1 million loan against her historic property, while enjoying a pristine island getaway. He viewed himself as a masterful tactician, moving people like pawns on a chessboard. A waiter, dressed in a pristine white uniform, approached their table, moving with practiced discretion. He held a small silver tray bearing a leather-bound check presenter. Jason did not bother to review the itemized receipt. He knew the meal cost more than most people earned in a month. He slid his hand into the breast pocket of his linen jacket, extracting a heavy metal corporate credit card. He dropped the card onto the silver tray with a casual flick of his wrist, offering the waiter a dismissive nod. "Keep the change," he instructed, turning his attention back to Sloane. The waiter bowed slightly and retreated toward the main terminal. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the linen tablecloth, preparing to discuss their upcoming real estate ventures. He envisioned the new firm they would build using the equity stolen from the Charleston estate. 3 minutes later, the waiter returned. The practiced smile had vanished, replaced by a stiff, formal expression. He set the silver tray back onto the table. "Sir, the transaction did not process," the waiter murmured, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the other affluent patrons. "The terminal indicates the issuer declined the charge." Jason scoffed, letting out a short, arrogant laugh. He picked up the metal card, inspecting the chip. "It is a security hold," he stated confidently. "International transactions often trigger automatic fraud alerts. Run it again and bypass the warning. I have attempted the authorization 4 separate times, sir," the waiter replied, his posture remaining rigid. "The system is not displaying a temporary hold. The account has been permanently frozen. Do you possess an alternative method of payment?" A faint prickle of irritation disrupted Jason's pristine mood. He pulled out his leather wallet, extracting his primary personal credit card. He handed it to the waiter, offering Sloane a reassuring smile. "Administrative errors happen," he muttered, finishing his champagne. The waiter walked away. This time he returned in less than 60 seconds. The manager of the restaurant, a tall, imposing man wearing a tailored suit and a discreet earpiece, accompanied him. Mr. Andrews, the manager, spoke in a clipped, measured tone. "Your secondary payment method has also declined." The irritation in Jason's chest morphed into a cold, heavy knot. He grabbed his smartphone, unlocking the screen to access his banking application. He intended to transfer capital from the joint savings account to clear whatever arbitrary block the bank had placed on his credit lines. He typed his secure password. The interface loaded, displaying a stark white page with a bold red notification indicating his login credentials were no longer valid. He switched to the Heritage Tourism Merchant portal, attempting to access the business operating funds. Access denied. He tried his mother's estate trust portal. Account locked. The tropical heat suddenly felt suffocating. A layer of cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He patted his jacket pockets, searching for another card, finding only a nearly maxed-out secondary line he kept for emergencies. He handed it to the manager. It declined instantly. The romantic atmosphere of the restaurant evaporated. Diners at adjacent tables began casting sideways glances, drawn by the escalating tension. "It appears none of your financial instruments are functioning, Mr. Andrews," the manager stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This dinner is merely a fraction of your overall folio. Your outstanding resort balance, which encompasses the overwater villa, the private yacht excursion, and the spa treatments, currently exceeds $30,000. We require immediate settlement." Jason stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the wooden deck. "I am good for the money," he snapped, his voice cracking slightly. "My financial institution is located in South Carolina. It is the middle of the night there. I will wire the funds the moment they open for business tomorrow." "Our hospitality policy forbids guests from carrying balances of this magnitude without a verified authorization on file," the manager countered, unblinking. "If you cannot produce a functioning card tonight, I am obligated to contact the local island authorities. Defrauding a luxury resort is a severe criminal offense in this jurisdiction. You will surrender your passport to the police and remain in their custody until the debt is satisfied." The threat of a foreign jail cell shattered whatever remained of Jason's arrogance. The air felt thin. He turned to Sloane, his eyes wide with frantic desperation. "Sloane, I need you to cover this," he pleaded, reaching across the table to grab her hand. "Just put the hold on your card for tonight. I will reimburse you with interest tomorrow." Sloane did not open her designer clutch. She remained perfectly still, observing the unraveling scene with the cold, calculating gaze of a seasoned opportunist. She navigated the cutthroat arena of commercial real estate. She recognized the signs of a collapsing empire. Men with solid portfolios did not experience simultaneous lockouts across every personal and corporate account. She knew about the forged loan application and the stolen trust funds. If his financial infrastructure was imploding, she had to sever ties instantly before the legal shrapnel destroyed her own career. She slowly pulled her hand out from under his grasp. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her silk gown. I am not putting $30,000 of debt on my personal credit line, Jason, she said, her tone entirely devoid of affection. I am booking a flight back to Atlanta right now. You need to handle your own mess. Sloane, he gasped, stepping toward her. You cannot abandon me here. She sidestepped his advance. Watch me, she whispered, turning on her heel and walking away down the lantern-lit pier, leaving him to face the manager alone. Isolated, terrified, and facing imminent arrest, Jason spent the next 3 hours sitting in a cramped, humid administrative office behind the resort kitchen. He utilized his cell phone to call every fraternity brother, distant relative, and college acquaintance he could locate in his contact list. He swallowed his pride, spinning pathetic, frantic lies about a stolen wallet and a lost passport. Most of the calls went straight to voicemail. A few individuals agreed to wire small sums, just enough to satisfy the resort manager and keep the local police away. The agonizing process left Jason with barely enough capital to purchase a one-way ticket out of the country. The man who had flown across the world in a lie-flat first-class suite found himself booking a miserable standby fare. His journey back to the United States was a grueling marathon of degradation. The itinerary featured a 30-hour transit time with extended layovers in crowded, chaotic international terminals. He was wedged into a cramped middle seat near the lavatory, surrounded by crying toddlers and stale air. His tailored linen shirt grew wrinkled and stained. His perfectly styled hair fell flat against his forehead. He was exhausted, humiliated, and running on sheer spite. During a chaotic 6-hour layover in a noisy European airport, Jason pulled his phone from his pocket. He needed to secure capital the moment he returned to Charleston. He had to convince his major local investors to fund his new real estate venture to cover the massive debts waiting for him. His staggering arrogance blinded him to the reality of his own destruction. He convinced himself that the financial freeze was a temporary banking error and that Heidi was still clueless sitting in a medical clinic recovering from her infection. He drafted a text message dripping with entitlement, assuming his wife would obey his every command. I am cutting my trip short, arriving tomorrow evening. I need you to host a welcome home dinner for the Charleston Investor Group. Order catering from the high-end place downtown. Have the house looking perfect. This is a critical pitch for my new firm. Do not fail me on this, Heidi. Thousands of miles away in South Carolina, I read the incoming text message while sitting in the quiet sanctuary of my home office. A dark, grim smile touched the corners of my mouth. He was walking directly into the trap. The dinner was not a threat. It was the perfect stage for his reckoning. I replied with a brief confirmation, assuring him everything would be ready. I set the phone down, feeling the deep satisfaction of a flawless strategy. The financial guillotine had executed perfectly. His isolation was complete. Now all I had to do was wait for him to step onto my historic property. But real life rarely adheres to a perfect script. The sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the calm silence of the room. The caller identification displayed Diana's name. I answered, expecting a routine update on the banking override procedures we had finalized earlier that afternoon. Heidi Diana's voice lacked its usual crisp composure, sounding rushed and tight. We have a severe complication. The family court judge assigned to your case just requested a recess to review the filings. I sat up straight, ignoring the sharp pull of my surgical stitches. What does that signify, Diana? You assured me the paperwork was ironclad. The evidence is flawless, she replied quickly. But the judge is a strict adherent to procedure. He is delaying his signature on your temporary possession order until tomorrow afternoon. He wants to review the financial ledgers one more time before formally evicting a spouse from a primary residence. My breath caught in my throat. What are you saying? I am saying the legal order granting you exclusive possession of the historic estate is not active yet. Diana explained the urgency, bleeding through her words. Jason is currently in the air. If his flight lands and he arrives at the property before that judge signs the document, he still retains every legal right to step onto that porch, enter the foyer, and walk through your front door. We cannot legally keep him out. The walls of the office seemed to close in around me. The meticulously planned confrontation, the secure fortress I had built, was suddenly vulnerable. The trap was set, but the lock remained broken. Jason was coming home, and I was rapidly running out of time. The clock on my kitchen wall became a relentless enemy. Every ticking second echoed like a hammer strike against my frayed nerves. Jason was currently hurtling across the Atlantic Ocean inside a pressurized metal tube, inching closer to the eastern seaboard with each passing hour. My sanctuary, my historic Charleston home, remained legally vulnerable. If his commercial aircraft touched down on the tarmac before the family court magistrate stamped my emergency petition, my husband could march right through the front door. He could access the physical safes, rummage through my filing cabinets, and potentially destroy the tangible evidence I had painstakingly gathered. I paced the length of the hardwood floor. The burning agony radiating from my surgical incision forced me to walk with a slight limp, but the adrenaline surging through my veins overrode the bodily trauma. I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to Diana negotiate with the judicial clerk. Her usually unflappable demeanor exhibited tiny cracks of frustration. The magistrate was a conservative traditionalist who loathed rushing eviction mandates involving marital residences. He demanded additional proof of malicious financial intent before severing a spouse's access to their primary domicile. "We need a smoking gun," Heidi Diana stated, her voice tight with urgency over the cellular connection. The forged loan application is powerful, but the defense could argue it was a misguided business decision executed during a period of extreme marital stress. The magistrate wants concrete evidence of predatory embezzlement, something irrefutable, something that demonstrates a pattern of active theft. I leaned against the granite countertop, rubbing my temples. We gave him the offshore routing numbers. We submitted the luxury resort receipts. What else does he require to comprehend the severity of this situation? Before Diana could formulate a response, the heavy brass knocker on my front door sounded 3 times. The sharp noise startled me. I was not expecting company. The premium barbecue catering I had reserved for the investor dinner was not scheduled to arrive for another 4 hours. I ended the call with my attorney, promising to search my digital archives for anything else that might satisfy the court. I navigated the hallway, peering through the glass side panel. Standing on the grand front porch was Constance. My mother-in-law looked vastly different from the imposing matriarch who had confronted me at the Kiowa Island estate just yesterday. The pristine armor of her southern socialite persona had entirely dissolved. She wore a simple beige cardigan and sensible flat shoes. Her signature silver hair lacked its usual immaculate volume. She clutched a thick leather portfolio tightly against her chest, looking frail and remarkably human. I unlocked the deadbolt, pulling the heavy oak barrier open. We stared at each other for a long, silent moment. For years, our relationship had been defined by a polite, icy distance. Constance possessed a lineage tracing back to the original colonial founders of South Carolina. She had always viewed my working-class background and my hands-on approach to heritage tourism as slightly beneath her family standards. I was the gritty entrepreneur who married her golden boy. But the golden boy had just decimated her life savings. "May I come in?" "Heidi," she asked, her vocal tone barely rising above a fragile whisper. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. She walked inside, moving with a slow, hesitant grace. I guided her toward the kitchen where Jackson and Harper were playing quietly in the adjacent den. Lily was asleep upstairs in the nursery. Constance placed the leather portfolio onto the island. "I listened to your voicemail," she began, her hands trembling slightly as she unzipped the heavy binding. "You mentioned your lawyer needed undeniable proof of his malicious intent to secure the house." I nodded, watching her carefully. "The judge is stalling. He views the corporate theft as a business dispute. He requires evidence of predatory behavior." Constance reached into the portfolio, extracting a stack of yellowed parchment documents bound by a thick blue ribbon. She set them down, sliding them across the smooth stone surface. "These are the original founding charters of my irrevocable retirement trust," she explained. "When my late husband established this fund, he included a very specific penalization clause. It clearly dictates that any trustee who diverts capital for non-approved personal leisure activities immediately forfeits their fiduciary authority and commits statutory fraud against the estate." She pulled a secondary document from the pile. It was a notarized banking ledger. "And this is the certified transaction history, showing Jason bypassing the mandatory dual signature protocol to wire hundreds of thousands of dollars into his failing shell companies. He forged my signature on the authorization waivers, Heidi. Just like he forged yours on that commercial real estate loan." I stared at the paperwork, realizing the magnitude of what she had just delivered. Constance was providing the exact ammunition Diana required. By handing over these highly confidential estate records, she was publicly exposing her son's criminal actions and subjecting her own family name to intense legal scrutiny. For a woman whose entire existence revolved around preserving an unblemished reputation, this act was equivalent to falling on a sword. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my expression softening. Constance looked away, her gaze drifting toward the den, where Jackson was building a tower out of wooden blocks. "Because I spent 30 years protecting a facade," she murmured, a single tear escaping her eye and tracking down her wrinkled cheek. "I coddled him. I covered his mistakes. I created a man who believes the rules do not apply to him. He stole your security, and he stole my future. I will not allow him to steal this home from my grandchildren." I picked up the documents, instantly photographing every page with my smartphone and transmitting the encrypted files directly to Diana. The attorney sent a rapid confirmation, promising to march the new evidence straight into the magistrate's chambers. With the legal maneuver executed, a heavy silence settled over the kitchen. The adrenaline momentarily receded, leaving me swaying on my feet. The toll of the surgical infection flared, reminding me of my fragile state. I grabbed a plastic laundry basket, overflowing with clean, folded clothes meant for the children, and attempted to lift it. A sharp spasm of pain shot across my abdomen, forcing me to drop the plastic handles. Constance immediately stepped forward, pushing my hands away. "Sit down, Heidi," she instructed, displaying a familiar maternal authority. "You are bleeding through your bandages." I collapsed onto a wooden bar stool, breathing heavily. To my absolute astonishment, the wealthy matriarch, who rarely performed manual labor, pulled the laundry basket toward herself. She began sorting the tiny garments, smoothing the wrinkles out of Jackson's play shirts and folding Harper's colorful pajamas. I sat there watching her. It was a profoundly quiet moment of unexpected solidarity. Two women from vastly different worlds, separated by generation and class, suddenly united by the devastating betrayal of the exact same man. We did not speak. We did not need to offer platitudes or dissect the trauma. The simple, rhythmic act of folding laundry became a silent language of mutual support. We were both bleeding from wounds Jason had inflicted, but together we were building a tourniquet. An hour passed. The caterers arrived, setting up the elegant barbecue spread in the expansive courtyard. The scent of smoked brisket and sweet molasses filled the humid afternoon air. The stage was rapidly coming together for the investor dinner, but the legal shield remained absent. My phone vibrated against the granite counter. The caller identification flashed Diana's name. I snatched the device, bringing it to my ear. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Jason just landed in Atlanta," Diana announced, her vocal pitch echoing with a triumphant edge. "He is boarding his final connection to Charleston right now. He will be on the ground in 45 minutes. Did we get the signature I demanded?" Gripping the edge of the stool, Diana let out a sharp, satisfied breath. "The magistrate reviewed your mother-in-law's trust documents. The forgery pattern established undeniable predatory intent. He signed the emergency petition, Heidi. The temporary possession order is officially active. You have exclusive legal dominion over the historic property." A massive wave of relief crashed over me, so powerful it nearly brought tears to my eyes. The fortress was secure. The legal moat was filled. I thanked Diana, terminating the call. I looked at Constance, who had paused her folding. The matriarch offered a single, decisive nod, confirming she had heard the good news. I pushed myself off the bar stool, ignoring the lingering sting in my torso. The clock was no longer my enemy. It was now counting down to his destruction. I walked deliberately out of the kitchen, navigating the long corridor toward the grand foyer. I approached the heavy mahogany front door, stopping in front of the illuminated digital keypad. Jason had complained about this specific mechanism on his way out, assuming it was merely glitching. He never realized I possessed the master administrative code. I raised my index finger, pressing the glowing numbers. I deleted his personalized entry sequence entirely, erasing his access from the system mainframe. I inputted a brand new secure combination, hearing the internal deadbolt click into a permanent locked position. The trap was finally primed. The stage was perfectly set. The conquering hero was heading home to pitch his fraudulent empire, unaware that he was walking straight into an impenetrable wall. The late afternoon sun dipped below the towering palmetto trees, casting long golden shadows across the intricate brick courtyard. A warm southern breeze carried the rich, savory scent of hickory smoke and roasted garlic. Waiters wearing crisp white aprons arranged heavy silver chafing dishes along a sprawling ancient oak table. Instead of spending 3 agonizing days marinating poultry and baking complex pastries I had hired, the premier pitmaster in the county, trays of slow-cooked brisket, glazed ribs, and buttery cornbread filled the garden with an inviting, rustic aroma. In the past, I would have exhausted myself trying to present the illusion of a flawless domestic goddess. I used to polish the sterling silverware until my fingers cramped, desperate to impress my husband's affluent colleagues. Tonight, I refused to play that subservient role. I compensated the catering manager with a corporate check, feeling a profound sense of liberation. My energy was reserved for a much larger battle. I stood near the edge of the wraparound veranda, watching the staff finalize the beverage station. A sudden sharp ache flared near my lower abdomen. I gently pressed my hand against the cotton fabric of my dress, tracing the outline of my surgical dressing. The post-operative infection still burned, a relentless reminder of the bodily trauma I recently endured. Yet the agonizing physical sensation served a vital purpose. It grounded me. For weeks, a thick, heavy fog of postpartum despair had clouded my judgment. The betrayal, the sleep deprivation, the sheer terror of abandonment had kept me trapped in a state of constant panic. That haze had fully evaporated. My mind operated with a cold, methodical clarity. I was no longer a weeping victim, left behind in the dark. I was the architect of my own defense. The heavy wrought iron gates swung open, signaling the arrival of the first attendees. These individuals represented the pinnacle of local high society. They were venture capitalists, commercial developers, and hedge fund managers who wielded immense influence over the regional economy. Men wearing tailored seersucker suits and women draped in understated silk blouses strolled into my garden. They admired the manicured creeping fig climbing the historic masonry, sipping expensive bourbon from crystal tumblers. These affluent guests viewed my property merely as an unexploited asset, a lucrative stepping stone for their next suburban strip mall. They did not understand the blood and sweat required to restore this 19th century architecture. When I founded my heritage tourism enterprise, I spent countless nights stripping ancient paint and repairing original floorboards to preserve the authentic history of this estate. Every brick and wooden beam held a piece of my soul. This house was my sanctuary. It was a monument to my independence long before my spouse ever entered the picture. I descended the wooden steps to greet the early arrivals. A prominent financier named Harrison Brooks approached me, raising his glass in a cheerful salute. He was the primary target for the impending real estate pitch. He praised the relaxed atmosphere, complimenting the authentic culinary spread. "Your husband promised us a spectacular venue this evening," Heidi Harrison remarked, taking a sip of his amber liquor. "He mentioned big plans for this parcel of land. We are very eager to hear his vision for the expansion." I offered a polite, measured smile, thanking him for his kind words. The sheer dramatic irony of the situation was intoxicating. I looked around the crowded patio. The attendees laughed and exchanged pleasantries, discussing stock portfolios and golf handicaps. They were ignorant to the legal landmines buried beneath their Italian leather loafers. They believed they were here to celebrate a lucrative new partnership with a rising star. They had no idea they had been invited to witness a financial execution. Constance emerged from the main hallway, stepping onto the patio with quiet dignity. She had traded her earlier vulnerability for a mask of composed stoicism. She held a glass of sparkling water, navigating the crowd with practiced elegance. Several older investors immediately recognized the prominent matriarch, flocking to her side to offer their regards. She greeted them with her signature polite charm, never once revealing the devastating truth about her ruined retirement portfolio. When our eyes met across the manicured lawn, she offered a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. She understood her role in the upcoming theater. She was prepared to publicly detonate her own son's credibility to protect her grandchildren. Watching her converse with a local banking executive, I felt a renewed surge of strength. We were two generations of women standing on the precipice of a radical transformation, bound by the necessity of survival. The evening sky deepened into a vibrant shade of twilight indigo. Overhead string lights illuminated the garden, casting a warm, festive glow over the gathering. The ambient noise of clinking silverware and lively conversation crescendoed into a steady hum. Every element of the party felt perfectly orchestrated. The catering staff moved seamlessly, replenishing the food stations and offering fresh napkins. My children remained safely tucked away upstairs, under the watchful eye of my trusted neighbor, reading bedtime stories in the nursery. The family court documents rested securely inside my locked desk drawer, waiting for the precise moment of deployment. The fortress was impenetrable. The only missing component was the guest of honor. A low, rumbling engine noise drifted over the brick privacy wall, disrupting the gentle evening ambiance. The sound belonged to a heavy luxury vehicle slowing down along the cobblestone street. I excused myself from a conversation with a junior associate, moving strategically toward the front entrance of the courtyard. My pulse accelerated, pushing a fresh wave of adrenaline through my circulatory system. The physical discomfort in my side faded into the background, overshadowed by the thrilling anticipation of the trap snapping shut. I positioned myself near the iron gate, maintaining a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the curb. A sleek black sport utility vehicle glided to a halt under the glow of a municipal street lamp. The tinted windows obscured the interior, but the identity of the passenger was undeniable. This was the premium car service favored by affluent travelers returning from the international airport. The heavy doors unlocked with a sharp mechanical thud. A polished leather loafer stepped onto the pavement, followed by the confident swagger of a man who believed he owned the world. Jason emerged from the back seat. The grueling 30-hour transit had wrinkled his expensive linen trousers, but a deep tropical tan masked his underlying fatigue. He stood on the sidewalk, adjusting his collar with arrogant precision. He retrieved a leather duffel bag from the driver, offering a dismissive wave before turning toward the property. His posture radiated an inflated sense of triumph. He stared at the illuminated historic house, preparing to walk through the gates and play the conquering hero in front of his wealthy financial backers. He took a confident step forward, entirely unaware that his kingdom had already fallen to ashes. The heavy wrought iron gates groaned softly as they swung inward. Jason stepped onto the historic brick courtyard, exuding an aura of unearned triumph. He paused under the warm glow of the gas lanterns, dropping his leather duffel bag onto the ground with a dull thud. He dismissed his hired driver with a careless flick of his wrist, failing to offer a tip or a word of gratitude. He turned his attention toward the crowded garden. Any normal father, returning from an extended overseas absence, would immediately glance toward the second-floor windows, searching for a glimpse of his young children. A decent husband would seek out his recovering spouse to ask about the newborn infant. Jason did not look up. His gaze bypassed the nursery entirely, locking onto the shimmering crystal tumblers and tailored seersucker suits of his financial targets. He plastered a winning smile across his tanned face, running a hand through his windblown hair to perfect the careless, wealthy aesthetic. He marched into the gathering, acting as if he owned every stone beneath his expensive loafers. He gravitated straight toward Harrison Brooks, the prominent financier, standing near the outdoor bar. Jason extended his hand, offering a firm, masculine handshake. He launched into a charismatic monologue, detailing his fabricated networking successes. He spun an elaborate tale of overseas market research and international commercial trends. He described the Indian Ocean as a bustling hub of modern development, carefully omitting the grim reality of his declined credit cards, his humiliating escape, and his desperate begging. The surrounding investors leaned in, captivated by his confident delivery. He projected the image of a seasoned titan of industry, ready to conquer the local market. Watching him from the shadows of the veranda, I felt a profound sense of disgust mixed with dark anticipation. The dramatic irony hung heavy in the humid southern air. Every person in that courtyard, except Jason, knew something was amiss, but only I held the fatal truth. He stood there, boasting about endless capital, while possessing a net worth of exactly zero. His corporate credit lines were dead. His access to the heritage tourism software was permanently revoked. His own mother had just handed over the irrevocable proof of his embezzlement to a family court judge. He was a hollow shell, parading around in designer clothing, pitching a lucrative future that had already been systematically dismantled. Constance stood a few yards away, holding a glass of sparkling water. She observed her son weaving his intricate web of lies. A fleeting shadow of sorrow crossed her eyes, replaced quickly by a hardened, resolute stare. She remained silent, allowing him to dig his grave deeper with every boastful sentence. Jason finally noticed me standing near the buffet tables. He paused his presentation, excusing himself from the circle of venture capitalists. He strode across the patio, his eyes flashing with a silent warning, demanding I play my assigned role. He approached me, opening his arms wide for the benefit of the affluent audience. He wrapped his hands around my shoulders, leaning in to press a lingering theatrical kiss against my cheek. His expensive cologne failed to mask the scent of stale airplane cabin air and dried sweat. The physical contact sent a jolt of revulsion down my spine, but I maintained a stoic, pleasant expression. He pulled back, keeping one arm draped heavily over my waist to project a unified marital front. "You look exhausted," he whispered, his voice dropping to a low, patronizing register meant only for my ears. "The dark circles under your eyes are very noticeable. But the catering looks decent. I knew you would handle everything with the kids while I was gone. Good girl." The sheer condescension in his tone would have broken my spirit a month ago. I would have internalized the insult, allowing his casual dismissal of my physical suffering to feed my postpartum despair. Tonight, his staggering arrogance merely fueled my quiet resolve. I did not flinch. I did not pull away or defend my pale complexion. I offered a serene, polite nod, playing the part of the devoted, exhausted wife. I waited patiently in the wings, allowing him the slack he desperately needed to hang himself. Jason turned his attention back to the crowd, gesturing for Harrison and the other key stakeholders to gather closer. He requested a glass of bourbon from a passing waiter, holding the amber liquid high to command the patio. The low hum of polite conversation faded as the affluent guests directed their focus toward the returning host. "I want to thank you all for joining us this evening." Jason began projecting his voice to reach the back of the garden. Traveling abroad always provides a crucial perspective on domestic potential. I spent the last few weeks analyzing global luxury markets, realizing that our greatest untapped resources sit right here in our own backyard. He took a slow, measured sip of his drink, letting the silence build suspense. He was a master of corporate theater, utilizing every trick in his psychological repertoire to manipulate his wealthy audience. "We are standing on one of the most historically significant parcels of land in the entire state," he continued, turning his body to face the grand facade of my ancestral home. "This 19th century architecture represents a pristine foundation for modernization. My wife and I have spent years cultivating the heritage tourism sector. We have optimized the operational cash flow, maximizing the aesthetic value of the estate. But the true profit lies in commercial expansion." He stepped away from me, moving toward the center of the group. He began detailing a fictitious development proposal. He outlined a ruthless plan to rezone the sprawling gardens, tearing down the ancient palmetto trees to construct luxury boutique suites and a high-end dining pavilion. He tossed around financial buzzwords like equity leveraging and rapid capitalization. The investors nodded, holding their crystal glasses, looking intrigued by the prospect of transforming my historical sanctuary into a sterile, commercial resort. They viewed the heritage of the property as a mere obstacle to be bulldozed for a higher profit margin. The magnitude of his delusion was staggering. He stood under the string lights, surrounded by the elite echelons of the city, confidently auctioning off a property he had zero legal claim over. He was utilizing my inheritance, my blood, and my physical pain as a shiny lure to trap their investment capital. He believed the forged digital consent forms he left behind had secured his total dominance over my life. He thought my temporary silence equated to permanent submission. He assumed his technical lockout attempt had left me paralyzed and compliant. He raised his glass once more, sweeping his arm in a broad, dramatic arc toward the illuminated columns of the veranda. "I promise you a major stake in this estate," he announced, his voice ringing with unwavering certainty. "We are going to build a legacy that will dominate the regional market for decades." The venture capitalists murmured in approval, preparing to raise their own glasses in a toast to the new enterprise. The illusion was flawless. The trap was now filled to maximum capacity. I released a slow, calming breath, letting the lingering pain in my side sharpen my focus. The time for waiting had officially expired. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, stepped out from the shadows of the catering tables, and walked directly into the center of the courtyard. The cobblestones felt solid beneath my low heels as I closed the distance between the shadowed veranda and the illuminated center of the garden. My movement was deliberate and unhurried. The humid Charleston evening clung to my skin, but the feverish heat inside my veins had transformed into ice. I navigated through the affluent crowd, passing waiters holding silver trays and venture capitalists sipping expensive bourbon. The lively chatter of high society networking echoed against the ancient brick walls. Jason stood near the outdoor bar, raising his crystal tumbler to punctuate his grand, fabricated vision. "Jason!" I called out. My voice did not tremble. It carried a clear, resonant pitch that sliced cleanly through the ambient noise. The sharp tone commanded immediate attention. The surrounding financiers paused their conversations, turning their heads toward me. Harrison Brooks lowered his glass, his brow furrowing in mild curiosity. Jason halted mid-sentence. A fleeting spasm of irritation contorted his features before he quickly smoothed it over with a practiced, polished grin. He reached his free arm outward, projecting the image of a patient, loving partner indulging his weary spouse. "Darling," he cooed, taking a step in my direction. "We are right in the middle of the development prospectus. Why do you not go upstairs and check on Lily? You need your rest." I ignored his outstretched hand, halting just a few feet away from his tailored linen trousers. The physical ache in my abdomen pulsed a steady reminder of the reality I had survived, while he was lounging on a tropical beach. I squared my shoulders, fixing my gaze directly onto his eyes. "Before Harrison and the board commit any capital to this proposed expansion," I said, maintaining a conversational yet piercing volume, "I would like you to produce the legal authorization." Jason blinked. The charismatic smile faltered, shrinking into a thin, uncertain line. "Excuse me," he muttered. "The legal authorization," I repeated, enunciating every syllable. "Please show these gentlemen the signed, notarized documents proving you possess any legitimate right to liquidate, rezone, or develop my ancestral estate." A profound stillness descended upon the courtyard. The clinking of silverware ceased. The soft jazz playing from the hidden outdoor speakers suddenly sounded deafening. Wealthy stakeholders possess an innate, primal instinct for detecting financial instability. The casual, relaxed posture of the crowd evaporated. Men in seersucker suits shifted their weight, exchanging wary glances. The intoxicating illusion of a lucrative partnership fractured. Jason let out a hollow, forced chuckle. He looked toward Harrison, shaking his head in feigned sympathy. "I apologize, gentlemen. The postpartum recovery has been incredibly difficult. The sleep deprivation causes these episodes of paranoia. My wife is just exhausted. Let us move into the study to finish our discussion." He stepped forward, attempting to grip my elbow and steer me away from the audience. I held my ground, refusing to yield a single inch. "Do not touch me," I commanded. The icy authority in my response froze him in place. His hand hovered in the air before dropping awkwardly back to his side. I reached into the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. I extracted a pristine stack of thick parchment paper. The crisp rustle of the pages seemed magnified in the silent garden. I bypassed Jason entirely, turning my attention toward the lead investor. "Mr. Brooks," I said, extending the documents toward the tall financier. "I believe due diligence is a fundamental requirement for your firm." Harrison hesitated for a fraction of a second before accepting the paperwork. He produced a pair of silver reading glasses from his breast pocket, sliding them onto the bridge of his nose. He began to read. "The first page is the certified property deed from the county clerk," I explained, projecting my voice so every stakeholder could hear the truth. "It confirms this historical property was purchased prior to our marriage, using my personal inheritance. The title resides solely under my legal identity. The second document is a formal notification from the Commercial Banking Fraud Division. It outlines a recent attempt to secure a massive, unapproved loan against this estate using a forged digital signature. Harrison's eyes scanned the dense legal text. The color drained from his face, replaced by a stark, grim realization. He was a seasoned shark who avoided toxic assets at all costs. He recognized the undeniable proof of a criminal conspiracy staring back at him. He looked up, peering over the rim of his spectacles. His gaze locked onto Jason, radiating pure, unadulterated contempt. "You represented this parcel as a jointly controlled asset," Harrison stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. "You requested a seven-figure initial investment based on equity you do not possess." Jason swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed visibly against his throat. The deep tropical tan suddenly appeared sickly, masking a pale, underlying terror. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, trailing down the side of his face. He stammered, stumbling over his carefully rehearsed vocabulary. "Harrison, there is a misunderstanding," he babbled, raising both hands in a placating gesture. "The administrative paperwork is merely delayed. We operate as a single financial entity. I am the managing director of the overarching portfolio. The equity is secure." "No, it is not," a feminine voice declared, cutting through the humid air like a silver blade. The crowd parted. Constance stepped out from the shadows of the creeping fig vines. The matriarch moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her beige cardigan standing out against the sea of dark evening wear. She bypassed the junior associates and the hedge fund managers, walking directly into the illuminated center of the patio. She stopped next to me, presenting a unified, impenetrable front. Jason stared at his mother, his mouth falling slightly open. The sight of the proud Southern socialite breaking rank derailed his remaining cognitive functions. "Mom," he whispered, a desperate plea for maternal protection. "What are you doing out here?" Constance did not offer comfort. She looked her son in the eye, her expression devoid of any residual warmth. Her posture radiated the crushing weight of a shattered dynasty. "You do not manage anything," she stated, her voice ringing with unwavering clarity. "You are a thief. You forged my signature to bypass the fiduciary protocols on my irrevocable trust. You drained hundreds of thousands of dollars from the accounts your father built to secure our family." A collective gasp rippled through the affluent audience. Stealing from a spouse was a scandalous marital dispute. Defrauding a widowed mother of her generational wealth was an unforgivable social sin. The invisible boundary of high society decorum had been breached. Jason took a frantic step backward. His eyes darted around the courtyard, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, an escape route. He found nothing but cold, judging stares. "Mom, please stop talking," he begged, his voice cracking under the mounting pressure. "You are confused. The capital is safely invested. We can discuss the ledgers privately, inside." Constance lifted her chin, refusing to lower her volume. "You used my retirement account to fund your mistress. You own nothing here." The devastating declaration hung in the air, sealing his fate. The exact details of his betrayal, the luxury vacation, the junior real estate partner, the financial ruin, were now public record. The carefully constructed facade of the conquering entrepreneur shattered into microscopic fragments. The reaction from the venture capitalists was instantaneous and brutal. Harrison Brooks shoved the certified documents back into Jason's chest, forcing the disgraced man to scramble to catch the falling papers. Harrison turned on his heel, signaling to his associates. "We are leaving," the financier announced, radiating disgust. "Do not ever contact my firm again, Andrews. You are radioactive." The social contagion spread rapidly. The wealthy guests backed away, physically recoiling, as if Jason carried a lethal pathogen. The men in tailored suits set their crystal glasses down on the catering tables, abandoning the premium bourbon and the smoked brisket. They moved toward the heavy iron gates, whispering in hushed, horrified tones. The network Jason had cultivated over a decade evaporated in a matter of seconds. "Wait," Jason pleaded, his voice rising to a frantic, pathetic pitch. "Harrison, please, wait. I can fix this. I can secure alternative collateral. Just give me 5 minutes to explain the restructuring plan." He lunged forward, attempting to grab the sleeve of the departing financier. Harrison swatted his hand away with a violent motion, shooting a glare so lethal it stopped Jason dead in his tracks. The mass exodus continued, leaving the disgraced host standing alone in the center of the brick courtyard, surrounded by abandoned chafing dishes and discarded napkins. Jason spun around, facing me and Constance. His chest heaved, pulling ragged breaths into his lungs. The reality of his total isolation finally breached his staggering arrogance. His empire was dead. His reputation was incinerated. His family had transformed into his executioners. He opened his mouth to scream a furious accusation, ready to unleash his displaced rage upon the two women who had engineered his downfall. Before a single syllable could escape his lips, the loud metallic groan of the wrought iron gate swinging open interrupted the tense silence. A man walked through the entrance. He wore a nondescript gray suit, carrying a thick leather envelope under his left arm. He bypassed the fleeing investors, maintaining a brisk professional stride. His shoes clicked rhythmically against the historical masonry, bringing a brand new threat directly into the heart of the garden. The stranger in the gray suit navigated the abandoned catering stations with mechanical efficiency. His dull rubber soles barely made a sound against the historical brick paving stones. He did not care about the fleeing venture capitalists or the ruined real estate pitch. He was a creature of the legal system, operating on a strict bureaucratic mandate. He held a thick manila envelope sealed with a prominent red adhesive tab. Jason stood frozen near the outdoor bar. His brain struggled to process the rapid succession of disasters. He watched the approaching figure with wild, darting eyes. For a brief, delusional second, he seemed to believe this newcomer was a late arrival to the party, a rogue angel investor coming to salvage his ruined portfolio. "Are you Jason Andrews?" the man asked. His tone carried zero inflection. Jason puffed out his chest, attempting to summon a shred of his former authority. "Yes, I am the managing director here. What do you want?" The stranger did not offer a handshake or a business card. He simply thrust the heavy envelope forward, pressing it firmly against Jason's tailored linen shirt. "You have been served," the man stated. The process server immediately pivoted on his heel, retreating toward the wrought iron gates without another word. He vanished into the humid South Carolina night, leaving Jason clutching the stuffed package. A heavy silence descended upon the courtyard. The ambient jazz music had stopped, leaving only the sound of chirping cicadas hiding within the sprawling palmetto trees. Constance folded her arms across her beige cardigan, watching her son with a stoic, unblinking gaze. Jason stared at the manila folder as if it were a venomous serpent. His hands shook, causing the thick paper to rustle in the quiet garden. He ripped the red tab, breaking the seal. He reached inside, pulling out a dense stack of formal legal filings. I stood a few yards away, feeling the cool evening breeze brush against my skin. The sharp sting of my surgical incision remained, but the accompanying adrenaline washed away my fatigue. I watched his eyes scan the top sheet. The first document was the divorce petition. It outlined my demand for sole physical custody of Jackson Harper and Lily. It detailed the immediate freeze on all joint marital assets and requested a permanent restraining protocol based on financial abuse. His jaw slacked. He flipped to the next section. The second packet contained the corporate termination directives. My attorney, Diana, had drafted an ironclad severance agreement. The paperwork legally stripped Jason of his executive title within the Heritage Tourism enterprise. It formally documented his unauthorized digital lockout attempt, using that action as grounds for immediate dismissal with extreme prejudice. He was no longer a partner, a director, or an employee. He was an outsider facing impending litigation for corporate sabotage. He swallowed hard, turning to the final page. This was the lethal blow. The document bore the fresh ink signature of the conservative family court magistrate. It was an emergency order granting me exclusive legal possession of the primary residence. The mandate commanded Jason to vacate the premises upon receipt of the notice, stripping him of any right to occupy the ancestral estate. Jason dropped the papers onto the brick patio. The sheets scattered across the ground, settling near a discarded plate of smoked brisket. He looked up, his face pale and contorted. "Heidi?" he breathed, his voice barely a hollow rasp. "You are evicting me? From my own house?" I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone even and measured. "It is not your house, Jason. It never was. You merely resided here while you plotted to steal it." He shook his head, taking a staggering step forward. "You cannot do this. We have children sleeping upstairs. I am their father. You are acting out of spite." I refused to absorb his manipulation. "You abandoned a newborn infant and a bleeding wife to drink champagne with your junior associate on a tropical island. Do not invoke the children you left behind to shield yourself from the consequences of your own greed." He turned his desperate gaze toward the matriarch. "Mom, tell her she is being irrational. Tell her we need to resolve this internally." Constance did not flinch. She picked up her glass of sparkling water, taking a slow, deliberate sip. "You dug this grave, Jason," she replied, her tone dripping with southern frost. "Now you get to lie in it. Do not ever forge my signature again." She turned her back on him, walking gracefully toward the veranda steps. She ascended the wooden staircase, disappearing into the house, leaving him entirely undefended. Jason panted, wiping the nervous sweat from his forehead. "Fine," he spat, a sudden flash of cornered anger replacing his panic. "We will play this stupid game. I will call my own attorneys in the morning. I am going inside to pack my belongings and sleep in the guest suite. You cannot physically stop me." He pivoted sharply, marching toward the heavy mahogany front door. He intended to stage a hostile sit-in, utilizing his physical presence to intimidate me into a negotiation. I reached down behind the nearest catering table, retrieving a bag I had prepared earlier that afternoon. It was not his expensive leather Toomey Weekender. That luxury item remained locked in my secure storage, designated as a frozen marital asset. Instead, I held a cheap, faded canvas gym duffel. Inside, I had stuffed 3 pairs of wrinkled khaki trousers, a handful of generic cotton shirts, and a basic plastic toothbrush. I stripped him of his bespoke armor, providing only the bare minimum required by the court. I carried the canvas bag toward the porch, watching his arrogant march. Jason reached the grand entryway. He grabbed the brass handle, pulling downward. The mechanism held firm. He let out a frustrated sigh, glaring at the illuminated digital keypad mounted on the doorframe. Just hours before his departure, he had complained about this specific security measure, calling it glitchy. He assumed the technology was merely malfunctioning. He never considered I possessed the master administrative authority. He raised his index finger, punching his personalized access code into the system. The panel emitted a sharp, negative beep. A small red indicator light flashed in the darkness. He scowled, hitting the reset button. He typed the numbers again, pressing the glass surface harder. Beep. Red light. He slammed his palm against the heavy oak wood. He typed a third time, his fingers trembling with frantic urgency. Beep. Red light. The realization crashed over him, paralyzing his limbs. The historical sanctuary, The lucrative real estate, the safe harbor he always took for granted, was sealed shut. The fortress had locked him out. He slowly turned his head, looking over his shoulder. I stood at the bottom of the wooden steps, holding the cheap canvas bag. "No," he stammered, his chest heaving, as he stared at the glowing red indicator. "No, no, this cannot be happening." I tossed the duffel bag onto the bottom step. The canvas slapped against the painted wood with a dull finality. "It already happened, Jason," I replied, my voice echoing in the quiet garden. "You were just on vacation." He stared at the cheap bag, then back at the locked door. His broad shoulders slumped, collapsing inward under the crushing weight of his defeat. He looked toward the street, searching for the premium car service that had delivered him. The curb was empty. The hired driver had departed long ago. The affluent investors had fled. His mistress had abandoned him thousands of miles away. He had zero access to the banking applications on his phone. His credit cards were dead plastic rectangles. He possessed no cash and no allies. "Leave the property," Jason I instructed, folding my arms across my chest. "Or I will instruct the local police to enforce the magistrate's trespass order." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. He saw the cold, unrelenting truth shining in my eyes. The era of his manipulation was over. He slowly descended the wooden stairs, bending down to pick up the faded gym bag. He slung the cheap canvas strap over his shoulder, a stark contrast to his tailored trousers and imported shoes. He did not look at me again. He turned toward the wrought iron gates, shuffling his feet across the historical brick pavers. I stood on the porch watching him navigate the long, winding driveway. The towering palmetto trees cast dark, imposing shadows over his retreating figure. The man who had flown first class across the globe was now forced to walk on foot into the humid, suffocating night, stripped of his family, his financial backing, and his unearned wealth. His journey toward total ruin had officially begun. I listened to the rhythmic crunch of his expensive loafers against the gravel until the sound faded into the distant hum of highway traffic. The threat was banished. The garden was silent. I placed my hand against the mahogany door, feeling the sturdy, ancient wood beneath my palm. The battle was won, but the quiet aftermath of the war awaited me on the other side of the threshold. 8 months passed. The suffocating heat of that July evening yielded to a crisp coastal winter. Far away from the manicured gardens of high society, Jason learned the true cost of his hubris. He resided in a dilapidated roadside motel, positioned precariously close to an interstate highway. The ceaseless roar of 18-wheelers rattling the thin window panes served as his nightly lullaby. His bespoke linen suits hung limp inside a damp closet, reeking of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. He owned precisely 2 ceramic coffee mugs and a folding metal chair. The legal machinery dismantled his life with a slow, agonizing precision. The state regulatory board revoked his commercial brokerage license pending a severe fraud investigation. The venture capitalists he once courted treated his name like a contagion, ensuring no reputable firm would ever hire him. His former mistress secured immunity by testifying against his forged loan schemes, leaving him to shoulder the entire legal burden alone. Creditors hounded his prepaid cellular phone at all hours, demanding restitution for the drained trust accounts and the unpaid luxury resort debts. He spent his days sitting on the edge of a sagging mattress, staring at a pile of manila envelopes he lacked the courage to open. The man who willingly traded his family for a taste of unearned glory now choked on the bitter ash of his own choices. Meanwhile, I sat behind the reclaimed mahogany desk inside my thriving tourism headquarters. The winter sunlight streamed through the tall plantation shutters, casting a warm, geometric pattern across the restored hardwood floor. The business flourished under my sole direction. Without a parasitic partner siphoning capital to fund hollow shell ventures, the revenue margins soared. I launched 3 new historical walking tours and secured a prestigious preservation grant from the City Council. The ancestral home stood proud and impenetrable. I signed a stack of employee payroll checks, sliding them into neat envelopes. The physical pain of my surgical infection had faded into a faint silver line across my lower abdomen. The immediate crisis was neutralized. The legal battles were effectively won. The fortress was secure. Yet, in the profound quiet of a Tuesday afternoon, a strange sensation washed over me. For the better part of a year, I had operated on pure survival instinct. Adrenaline fueled my days, and righteous indignation powered my sleepless nights. I treated my existence like a tactical military operation, neutralizing threats and fortifying defenses. Now the enemy was vanquished. The perimeter was safe. The silence filling my office felt heavier than the chaos ever did. My hands began to tremble. I dropped the silver pen onto the leather blotter. A hollow, agonizing ache blossomed in the center of my chest. The war was over, but my nervous system refused to stand down. I closed my eyes, struggling to draw a full breath. I was no longer afraid of the man who betrayed me. I was merely hollowed out, carrying a heavy, invisible weight. The following morning, I walked into a clinical counseling center located just outside the historical district. The waiting room smelled of lavender and old paper. A woman named Dr. Evans guided me into a modest office featuring a plush beige sofa and a large window overlooking a quiet courtyard. I sat down, smoothing the fabric of my skirt, maintaining my practiced stoic posture. For the first 40 minutes, I delivered a meticulous logistical briefing. I recounted the abandoned infant, the declined credit card, the forged loan documents, the tropical island, and the investor dinner. I rattled off the dates, the financial figures, and the court mandates with clinical precision. I spoke about the divorce settlement and the sole custody arrangement outlining the structural parameters of my new reality. Dr. Evans listened without interrupting. She took sparse notes on a yellow legal pad, her expression radiating a calm, empathetic patience. When I finally finished my chronological presentation, she set her pen down. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You have given me a brilliant summary of a complex legal battle, Heidi Plays," she said, her tone remarkably gentle. "You detailed what happened to the estate, you explained what happened to the banking portfolio, you described what happened to the marriage." She paused, letting the silence stretch between us. "But you have not told me what happened to you." I opened my mouth to respond, intending to offer a sharp, capable answer. I planned to state that I was functioning optimally, managing a household and running a successful enterprise. I wanted to project the identical, resilient facade I displayed for the venture capitalists and the catering staff. No words materialized. My throat tightened, constricting around a hard, painful knot. Then, without any warning, the dam broke. I pressed my hands over my face and wept. I did not shed graceful, cinematic tears. I sobbed with a raw, gasping intensity that shook my shoulders and ruined my careful makeup. I cried for the isolated mother pacing the floorboards at 3 a.m. I cried for the physical agony of lifting a newborn while battling a fever. I cried for the sheer, terrifying vulnerability of realizing the person tasked with protecting my heart had calculated my destruction. I sat in that beige room, discovering a fundamental truth I had buried under layers of armor. For months, I utilized unyielding strength as my entire identity. I equated capability with survival. But enduring a betrayal does not require endless stoicism. Real fortitude encompasses the permission to shatter. Strong people are allowed to break. Spring arrived, washing the Carolina coast in bright pastel hues. A gentle sea breeze carried the scent of salt water and blooming jasmine. I stood on the wooden boardwalk at Folly Beach, wearing a loose linen shirt and comfortable sandals. The rolling Atlantic tide crashed against the shoreline, sending white foam spilling across the packed sand. A few yards away, Constance sat on a canvas folding chair, situated beneath a large striped umbrella. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat and a pair of dark sunglasses. My 4-year-old daughter, Harper, knelt beside her, proudly presenting a collection of smooth seashells. The matriarch inspected each shell with profound seriousness, offering gentle praise for the vibrant colors. Jackson chased a retreating wave, his laughter carrying over the ambient ocean noise. Lily, now approaching her first birthday, sat on a thick blanket near my feet, happily destroying a small sandcastle. Watching the elder woman engage with my children brought a quiet, stabilizing warmth to my chest. Constance and I shared an unconventional bond, forged in the crucible of a shared disaster. She downsized her life, moving into a modest, elegant condominium closer to the water. She never complained about the lost retirement funds. Instead, she focused her remaining energy on cultivating a genuine connection with the grandchildren she almost lost. We rarely discussed the man who fractured our family. We did not need to dissect the past. Our mutual presence served as a testament to our survival. I reached down, picking up Lily, resting her against my hip. She patted my cheek with a sandy palm, offering a wide, toothless grin. I kissed her forehead, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. My journey through the darkest season of my life left undeniable marks. The surgical incision healed into a permanent, pale scar across my skin. My capacity for blind trust remained permanently altered. Some days, a sudden memory would trigger a fleeting spike of anxiety, forcing me to pause and steady my breathing. Healing did not act as a magical eraser wiping away the trauma of that July morning. Healing merely taught me how to carry the weight without letting it dictate my trajectory. I used to believe the ultimate justice involved inflicting proportionate pain upon the person who wronged you. I imagined victory as a loud, spectacular event filled with dramatic apologies and public groveling. I now understood the hollow nature of revenge. Seeking retribution ties your energy to the antagonist, keeping their toxicity tethered to your soul. I looked out toward the endless blue horizon, watching the sunlight dance across the cresting waves. The air felt clean and unobstructed. True victory was not orchestrating Jason's financial ruin or watching him walk down the driveway with a cheap canvas bag. The real triumph was building a peaceful, sustainable reality where his choices could never threaten my safety again. I had secured a sanctuary for my children. I had protected my ancestral legacy. I had reclaimed my own narrative. The heavy iron gates of my life were securely locked. The key belonged solely to me. And for the first time in a very long time, the future looked exceptionally bright. The American dream is often painted with broad, flawless strokes. A manicured lawn, a thriving career, a smiling family gathered around a mahogany dining table. But as we witnessed in Heidi's harrowing journey, the architecture of a family is only as strong as the integrity of its foundation. When a husband and father abandons his recovering wife and newborn in the dead of night for a luxury escape, it shatters more than just a marriage. It breaks the sacred social contract of the traditional family. Reflecting on this story, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about parenting, familial responsibility, and the values we are truly passing down to the next generation. In the landscape of modern American culture, the pressure to maintain the nuclear family ideal is immense. We are sold a vision of the white picket fence where success is measured by outward stability and financial accumulation. There is a dangerous, quiet tendency to equate financial ambition with familial duty. We celebrate the relentless pursuit of wealth and frequently excuse emotional absence if it comes wrapped in the guise of providing. Jason believed his status and charm entitled him to a break from the grueling reality of a crying infant and a healing wife. He viewed his children not as sacred responsibilities, but as leverage, and his wife not as a partner, but as an asset to be managed, leveraged, and eventually liquidated. In many traditional households, the division of labor often silently shifts, placing the emotional and logistical burden entirely on the mother. Heidi's exhaustion was not just physical. It was the accumulated weight of being the default parent, the default problem solver, the default anchor. Jason's betrayal was simply the explosive culmination of 1,000 tiny daily abandonments. But true family responsibility is not about grand gestures or the appearance of success. It is found in the quiet, unglamorous moments of shared suffering. It is pacing the floorboards at 3 in the morning with a colicky baby. It is holding your partner's hand when their body is broken. Parenting, at its core, is the ultimate act of self-decentering when we fail to teach our children this. When we shield them from the necessity of sacrifice, we risk raising adults who view the world as a vending machine designed solely for their own desires. We must deliberately teach our sons that fatherhood is not a title you wear when it is convenient, but a vow you honor when it is hardest. We must teach our daughters that their worth is not measured by their capacity to endure mistreatment silently. This brings us to the profound generational lesson embodied by Constance. For decades, she played the role of the perfect Southern matriarch, smoothing over her son's mistakes to protect the family's pristine image. In traditional family structures, loyalty is often prized above all else, woven into the very fabric of the family crest. But loyalty without honesty is just complicity. Constance's tragic realization is a stark warning to all parents. When we protect our children from the consequences of their actions, we do not save them. We arm them with the arrogance that will eventually orchestrate their own destruction. Raising children with a deep sense of fairness means allowing them to feel the crushing weight of their mistakes. It means teaching them that trust is not a blank check, and that true love sometimes requires the courage to let them fall. Constance had to publicly dismantle her own son to save her grandchildren, a heartbreaking act of retroactive parenting that speaks volumes about the enduring necessity of truth over optics. Heidi's evolution throughout the ordeal highlights another vital pillar of parenting: emotional awareness. For so long, Heidi conflated strength with stoicism. She believed that being a good mother and a formidable woman meant enduring pain in silence, swallowing her panic to maintain order. How many of us do the exact same thing? We hide our tears in locked bathrooms. We plaster on brave smiles while our internal worlds collapse, believing that shielding our children from our grief is the ultimate form of protection. We teach our children to look both ways before crossing the street, to save their money, and to work hard in school. Yet we frequently neglect to teach them how to navigate the complex landscape of human disappointment. Heidi's breakdown in the therapist's office reveals a critical truth. Emotional awareness is not the absence of breaking. It is the transparency of healing. By allowing herself to shatter, Heidi broke a generational curse. She will not raise Jackson Harper and Lily to believe that they must be impenetrable to be worthy. She will teach them that it is entirely acceptable to bleed, to cry, and to ask for help. When a mother allows her children to see her humanity, her limits, her boundaries, and her requirement for respect, she models a standard of self-love they will carry into their own future marriages. Jackson Harper and Lily did not need a father who bought them expensive toys or funded luxury vacations. They needed a father who could tolerate the discomfort of their crying. By removing Jason, Heidi and Constance gave those children a gift far more valuable than the trust fund Jason drained: the gift of authenticity. In a society that constantly demands perfection, equipping our children with the emotional vocabulary to process trauma is perhaps the greatest inheritance we can leave them. It is the armor they will wear when the world inevitably disappoints them. The stories we tell ourselves, and the stories we share, have the immense power to reshape our understanding of family duty and resilience. They act as mirrors, reflecting our own hidden fears and unspoken triumphs. If Heidi's journey through betrayal, legal warfare, and ultimate redemption resonated with you, if it sparked a quiet recognition within your own heart, I invite you to follow Emily Told Stories. Here, we explore the raw, unfiltered narratives of life, love, and the profound strength of the human spirit. By joining our community, you become part of a vital conversation about what it truly means to navigate the beautiful, often messy reality of modern relationships and traditional values. We are conditioned from a very young age to believe that a broken home is an absolute tragedy. Society whispers that divorce, eviction, and the shattering of a traditional family unit are ultimate failures, scars that children will carry as heavy burdens forever. But look closely at the brick courtyard of Heidi's ancestral home. Look at the ocean waves washing over her children's feet at Folly Beach. Here is a truth that defies conventional wisdom. Sometimes the greatest act of family preservation is destruction. We are taught that keeping the family together at all costs is the highest virtue a parent can achieve. We are told that a two-parent household is the ultimate shield against a harsh and unforgiving world. But a home built on deceit, silent suffering, and emotional exploitation is not a sanctuary. It is a cage. By tearing down the facade of her marriage, Heidi did not break her family. She rescued it. She proved that the foundation of a real home is not made of shared bank accounts, matching last names, or forced holiday photographs. It is made of respect, accountability, and the fierce, unapologetic protection of one's own peace. When you turn off this screen and look around your own living room, ask yourself what you are truly preserving. Are you protecting the genuine peace of your household? Or are you merely guarding the fragile illusion of it? Because true safety isn't found in a house where the doors are locked tightly against the outside world. True safety is found when you finally have the courage to change the locks on the people inside.